Chapter 1386. Everyone subconsciously stopped whispering. The hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The thought of the end of the world could not be suppressed once it was born. It was like a shining sword hanging above everyone's head, ready to fall at any time. At this moment it seemed too late even if they wanted to be drunk or in a dream. "My lord, we have all heard of the legend of the world's dusk, but we never thought that we would face it in our lifetime," Veronica said in a deep voice. "We don't mind running away, but we really can't find a way to face it. We can't think of what to do. There will always be hope, but we can't passively wait for it to come," Tumen replied slowly. "We have faced such threats time and time again, but we always survived under its claws. This is because in every era, we have heroes who are willing to give up everything." Heroes. Not just one person, but the heroes of an entire generation, or even many generations. The power of mortals is not weak, but first you must show courage. Courage. Veronica frowned and looked at the others. Everyone had a puzzled look on their faces. "Lord Tumen, what do we need to do? Just like 1,000 years ago when you united together to fight against us. Are the Myrnas strong? Compared to mortals they may be strong, but we still lost to you, didn't we?" Tumen looked at these people. His agate eyes showed a hint of excitement and anticipation. "You are the descendants of the 4 wise ones. You are far from fighting alone. At least Lady Martha will always be by your side. But this is your world and your era. Whether it survives or not depends on your will." "I understand," Veronica suddenly replied. "The people of Fanzan have never forgotten the sacred oath," Rodrigue said at this time. "The appearance of the Order of the Silver Horse here proves this point. We may have some hatred in the past, but the descendants of the 4 wise ones have never forgotten that noble belief. We established this new order to protect and not destroy. We will take over everything from the Myrnas, and we will do better than you." "Very well. The fate of this world is handed into your hands because of an invisible will. I hope it will give Wonde a different future, just like Lady Martha's promise. Odin and I hope so too, and so do the 4 wise ones." Tumen looked at the Fanzan Knight captain, and then at everyone else. "There is a secret buried in the Alkash Mountains. It is one of the 5 most powerful fortresses of mortals and gods since the era of the Azure Knight. It is the center of the entire Tiamat defense system. Part of the wreckage of Babel Tower is located underground in the final battlefield. As long as you activate it, you can use it to resist the invasion of the Crystal Cluster army. Otherwise, with the remaining power of the Crew's empire, it will be difficult to resist these minions of dusk." "Babel Tower?" Vala could not help but be surprised. "Mr. Tumen, isn't that the legendary fortress of the gods? Legend has it that it fell to the earth after the era of the Azure Knight and was completely destroyed." "That is a fact. The war with the Dusk Dragon was tragic. In order to prevent the Dusk Dragon from invading our world, almost none of the gods survived that war. At the last moment of the war, the Azure Knight and the ancestors of the Bugas divided Babel Tower into 2, using the upper half to resist the fatal blow of the Dusk Dragon. The upper half of the Tower of Babel and the Great Library were completely destroyed, and the Bugas were left stranded on the earth. And the other half of Babel Tower fell to the ground, into the central area of the Great Plains. This disaster caused the Great Plains to be divided into 2, and the Alkash Mountains were born. Since then, the climate to the east of the Great Plains has been completely changed, turning into the Great Glacier we see today." "So that's how it is. There's actually such a history," Veronica murmured. "Could it be that the Great Library is the legendary Silver Library guarded by the ancestors of the Bugas?" "Yes," Vala nodded. "Legend has it that after the destruction of Babel Tower, the inheritance of the gods was completely lost, and the level of power of Wonde was once reduced. From then on, they entered the era of mortals, all because of the destruction of the Great Library." "Isn't that the case?" Tumen also replied. "In fact, the documents and war slate in the Great Library were not completely lost, they were just lost outside the boundary of the elements. In the thousands of years since then, the Knowledge Dragon Crystal has been secretly collecting these precious inheritances." "War slate?" Vahina suddenly asked. "Are you talking about those silver slates that fell from the sky? I seem to have seen them at Brando's place. That is the last gift the crystal gave you. Tumen sighed. The gods have left us, and the future of Wond must be created by you. In the silence, Veronica asked again. Babel Tower that fell to the ground, is it in the Alkash Mountains? To be exact, it is under the battlefield of the final battle. In fact, generations of darkness dragons have spent a long time looking for its whereabouts. The generation of darkness dragons before me and Odin finally determined its location. We placed the battlefield of the final battle here to protect this fortress. That baby girl, Vala suddenly said with a trembling voice. Is she also? Tumen glanced at him and nodded. About her origin you will understand in the future. But you guessed right, it is exactly as you imagined. The great sage could not help but take a deep breath, his face unreadable. Veronica looked at Vala strangely. She knew in her heart that there must be some secret. She could not help but think of everything that happened on the final battle 60 years ago. She even thought of Brando's grandfather, the former marshal. Although she vaguely felt that there might be some connection in her heart, she could not make up her mind at the moment. However, Rodrigue, the leader of the Order of the Silver Horse, was not interested in the secrets of Cruz's people. He asked, "Is it easy to find there? I can take you there. Can we find a way to activate it? It is a little troublesome, but it is not a problem for you. We can rely on this fortress to fight against the Twilight Dragon." Of course not. Tumen shook his head. It is at best the wreckage of the Babel fortress. Although it can still play some role, when it is in good condition, the gods can't even use it to fight against the Twilight Dragon. Then what do we need it for? Rodrigue was puzzled. Fighting against the Twilight Dragon is still too far away for you. But you first have to find a way to stop its claws and fangs. Can you fight against the Crystal Army? Tumen stared into Rodrigue's light blue eyes and said, Cruz's people are already powerless, but Fanzin's people don't seem to be able to pull out more troops, right? Rodrigue opened his mouth. Although he wanted to refute, he also knew that Fanzin's appearance was much better than the current Cruz Empire. But in fact, since a few months ago, the Empire had been fighting a war in the east. The war was covered up very well by the upper echelons of the Empire. Many people in the Empire did not even know who they were fighting, but the war was so fierce that it began to have an impact on the Empire. In many areas north of the 10 harbors, the young and middle-aged had been drawn away, and the scale of recruitment would expand to more prosperous areas. Even with the support of the elves of Eloranta, it seemed to be of no help. As the commander of the Empire's highest military force, Rodrigue of course knew who the Empire was fighting against, and his trip to help Cruz's people was actually, in a sense, helping the Empire itself. Fanzin's people could no longer afford to open up another battlefield in the south. Thinking of this, he could not help but shut his mouth. Tumen looked at him and Veronica, then continued, If you want to resist the invasion of the Crystal Army here, relying on the strength of Fanzin's people and Cruz's people is not enough. Remember what I said before, this is not only a matter of you, but a choice that the entire Wond must face. What do you mean? Ask the Wind Elves for help. Babel Fortress is here, but an empty fortress is not enough. If you want to use it to resist the claws of the Twilight Dragon, you must have soldiers. Kurlutz is about to die from blood loss. Even if you add in your Red Army, how sure are you that you can win? So only the Wind Elves can help you. You must ask your former allies for help. The Wind Elves. Veronica frowned. Forming an alliance with the Wind Elves. This topic caused everyone to fall into silence. Not only Cruz's people, but even Fanzin's people showed a difficult expression. The Four Sages and the Silver Folk had once formed a sacred alliance, but this alliance was soon abandoned. Ever since the Second Holy War, the descendants of the Wise Ones had been fighting against each other. After several generations, the tacit understanding and warmth that had once existed between the Wise Ones and the Wise Ones had disappeared. All that remained was an unhealable rift and hatred. If Fanzin's people and Cruz's people still maintained a tacit understanding, but the rift between the Wind Elves and humans was even more glaring. The grievances between the two different races had been planted since the moment they separated from each other. After experiencing a coup, a rebellion, and the death of the sages, the Wind Elves sealed the wilderness of the Four Territories, hid in the Green Forest, and built their cold and exclusive elven court. Chapter 1387. In fact, from that moment on, the door of communication between the two civilizations had been closed. This hatred may not be as blinding and fanatical as the annual battle between the Cruz people and the Nazar people on the border, nor could it be compared to the mutual ridicule and incompatibility between the Cruz people and the Fanzan nobles, but the gap between the humans and the elves was even more indifferent and difficult to bridge. According to historical records, since the Second Holy War, the Wind Elves had not sent an official envoy to Cruz or Fanzan, nor did they have any cultural and civil exchanges. In Fanzan and Cruz one could see dwarves, wild elves, and even lion people and Nazar people, but there was hardly any Wind Elves. The human world and the world of the Wind Elves behind the White Mountain seemed to have forgotten each other. Ever since the year of the croaking frogs, the only human kingdom that the Wind Elves interacted with the most was probably Aween, which was at the southern border of Kurlutz. But that was it. Even now, the Wind Elves had almost no interest in this human kingdom that they had once supported. Even if they allowed the other party to return to the embrace of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. And today, the Empire was in trouble, and the Kurlutz people once again remembered their former allies, remembered the comradeship they had left with the Wind Elves in the Battle of the Holy Saints. But even if they had the intention to heal this rift, the question was, would the Wind Elves appreciate it? The Crystal Cluster had not yet threatened the land of the Elves. The two were separated by the Evergreen Corridor, the Alkash Mountains, and the vast territory of the Empire. Even if the Wind Elves did not gloat over the Empire's misfortune, they at least maintained a considerable amount of silence. Otherwise, the Elves would not have shown such an indifferent attitude since the monsters under the Jorgandi Ridge invaded the Empire. Veronica was silent. It was not that she did not want to put down her pride and beg the Wind Elves, but the question was there any point in doing so? Tumen seemed to have read her mind and said, the Wind Elves were divided into 3 clans: the Sun, the Moon, and the Star. Among them, the Moon Elves were the friendliest to humans, while the Sun Elves were the coldest. The conflict between the Cruz and the Wind Elves started during the rebellion of the 10 Kings. Because they supported the Moon Elves, the Sun Elves, who later came to power, viewed them as enemies. Veronica nodded. The Sun Elf clan seized the throne shortly after Saintossel's death, and established the Rising Sun Empire. The hatred between the Cruz clan and the Wind Elves was born because of this. Due to the Sun Elf clan's previous condemnation of the Sun Elf king, the Sun Elf clan and the Moon Elf clan lost all diplomatic relations shortly after the Sun Elf clan expelled the Moon Elf clan. In fact, the Second Holy War also originated from this. Therefore, the conflict between the two parties was not as simple as the conflict between them and the Nazar people or the Fanzan people. That's why I said that there might be a turning point now. The Moon Elves have returned. Did you know that? What? Veronica was shocked. She had been under house arrest by the Silver Queen for the past few months. Of course, she had never heard of such a thing. The Moon Elves have returned? How could that be? As far as I know, there has been a huge change in the Wind Elf clan's court. Saintossel has returned there once and appointed a pair of new heirs, and they are human. Tumen replied slowly. How is that possible? Veronica was even more shocked. Is Saintossel the great sage? Is she still alive? Hasn't Eloranta been living in this world all this time? However, the situation of the Wind Empress is a little special. She has now left Saintossel, but there are people here who know the heir she left behind. Tumen said as his gaze fell on Mephistopheles and Andrique. Everyone noticed the old man's gaze and turned their attention to the vampire siblings. Mephistopheles, Andrique? Veronica was slightly taken aback, but she reacted quickly and almost immediately understood the crux of the matter. That pair of heirs. Are they related to Brendel? Mephistopheles smiled bitterly. Yes, Lady Veronica. In fact, Lady Saintossel has been with Master all this time. Master swordsmanship was also taught by her personally. What? Vahina could not help but cry out when she heard this. Veronica also gasped. The nobles of Cruz seemed to have only just remembered who the master of this vampire lady was. For a moment, their expressions were extremely strange. Heavens, doesn't that mean that he is the heir of a great sage? Elise, who was standing behind Vahina, seemed to have understood something. She exclaimed in disbelief, Sister, you have a good eye. I'm so impressed. Shut up, Vahina said with a red face. She felt indignant inside. No wonder that bastard was so powerful. It turns out that he was a student of a great sage. When she first met him in the loop of trade winds, she thought that Brando was just a small noble from the countryside. It was all because of him that she made a fool out of herself. The moment she thought of what happened back then, Vahina could not help but feel embarrassed and sweet at the same time. That despicable bastard. Veronica's expression also changed from shock to a bitter smile. She shook her head and said, "That little bastard. I don't know how many things he is hiding from us." She could not help but glance at Mephisto, who was not far away. She wondered what the Ash Sword Saint would think after knowing all this. However, she noticed that Mephisto was very calm. It was obvious that he already knew about this matter. In a sense, he and Brando each got what they needed. Moreover, he was very satisfied with Brando's attitude and talent as a student. In this world, it was not strange for a student to have many teachers. It was just that it was rare for a student to have two teachers who were so famous and outstanding. However, Mephisto did not think that he was on the same level as the four sages. That was why he accepted the fact very calmly when he heard the news from Tumen and Mephistopheles. The only thing that bothered him was the fact that Brendel did not tell him this secret. But then again, the news of a sage who had passed away long ago being alive was too shocking, and it was understandable that his student did not want this secret to be exposed. Besides, the sage might have a request for this secret as well. Thinking about it this way, he felt relieved. But no matter how one looked at it, this news was too shocking. For a moment, the nobles and crews were talking about it. Most of them came from Rushta and East Metz. They had more or less seen Brando or heard some rumors about this young man. Initially, they did not think highly of the countryside noble from Erewhon. But after the series of events that changed the fate of the entire empire after the Battle of Fulton Port, the young man's name had almost become a legend in the empire. And now, with the shocking news from the Mephistopheles, Brando's status in the nobles' hearts had risen even higher. The student of the four sages in the human world and even the world of the wind elves, what kind of status was this? Even the most ignorant country folk understood this. Oh right, he also knows the flash strike sword art. Someone suddenly said. The news of Brando knowing the flash strike sword art was spread by the Flame family knights. Although most of the Flame family knights had sacrificed their lives for the Empire during the Battle of Rushta and the battle against the Crystal Cluster, the surviving knights could not forget the terrifying strength displayed by the young man that night. Not to mention that the young man's flash strike sword art was completely different from the inheritance of the Empire. Although it was not complete, it was much more ancient. Thus, a terrifying thought began to spread among the crowd. Perhaps Count Ranner from Erewhon was the Flame King's student, or at least, he had received the Flame King's acknowledgement under certain circumstances. But when the people thought of this, they suddenly remembered that the Flaming Blade, Oderfeis, acknowledged Brando, and immediately became more convinced of this in their hearts. Many people turned their attention to Vala and Sydney, the highest representatives of the Holy Cathedral of Fire present, and the Lady Saintess of the Leo Palace had been with Brando for a long time. In fact, she had long suspected that the young man might have some kind of connection with the Flame King's inheritance, so at this moment, she did not express her opinion with a straight face. At this moment, Vala suddenly thought of something and could not help but look back. His gaze met the former Prime Minister of the Empire, Old Nydivan, who had been keeping a low profile in the crowd. Both of them saw the same speculation from each other's eyes. Regarding the last request of Her Majesty the Queen, both of their hearts skipped a beat at the same time, and could not help but set off a stormy wave of thoughts. Mephistopheles silently looked at the crowd, but was very satisfied that his words had caused such an effect. Tumen had told him and Andrique about the legend of the 7 sacred swords and the laurel crown, and in his opinion, the laurel crown belonged to none other than his master. But now, the first thing to do was to leave an indelible impression in the hearts of these people. With that thought in mind, he turned back to Tumen, and the old man smiled and nodded at him. Mephistopheles, Veronica had calmed down by this time and she continued to ask, "Can you think of a way to influence the wind elves, or should I say, influence the attitude of the air?" "I'm not sure, but I can try," Mephistopheles replied with a smile. "Master once saved Peya and her brother. If Master is here, I may have more confidence, but I don't know how much influence they have in the Wind Elven court." "Is Brando in Erewhon?" Vahina suddenly asked. Can you find a way to contact him? Mephistopheles shook his head. Master doesn't seem to have returned to Erewhon, and we can't find a way to contact him. But Master is not in any danger now, and he may have more important things to do. Sooner or later, he will return to Erewhon. If that's the case, Vahina said regretfully, then we have to go to St. Tossol ourselves. But will the Wind Elves agree? Maybe, Veronica answered her student with uncertainty. Oh. Chapter 1388. Only a small number of planeswalkers will act alone. Planeswalkers are the masters of countless planes. In their own worlds they have countless territories, wealth and servants. The card deck that the young man chose for you is a knight. I have seen your other cards of fate. Whether it is White City Vanguard or Cavalry Readiness, they are more suitable for big situations. I think your class should be a Knight Lord who commands thousands of troops. However, no matter how glorious a kingdom is, it starts from a small piece of land. I will send you to complete the challenge of the King of Knights. You will build your kingdom and glory in a fictional world until you receive the recognition of the gods. And this is the true meaning of the arena of the gods. After a dazzling light, the strange world disappeared. The silver-haired elven girl stood alone in a golden wilderness. A gentle breeze blew across the plains, and the withered grasses and grasses fell to the ground. But when this scenery stretched across the sky and the earth, it formed a strange landscape. The sound of the waves swept across the lonely world like the waves of the sea. The evil dragon King Fuchsia's words were still in her ears, and the wind blew through her ears and hair. Medisha silently looked at this strange land, the wilderness of solitude. This escaped world is like a traveler looking at the parallel material world. It is at the end of a corner of the world like a traveler at the end of the world, a voice said. A voice said. Perhaps there should have been no voice, but when the unfamiliar knowledge entered her mind, Medisa understood where she was. A swordsman wearing clothes with complicated patterns parted the withered grass and came in front of her. He raised his sword, and his silver mask shone under the sunlight. Medisha was stunned for a moment before she realized that this was a challenge. She nodded to the unfamiliar swordsman and picked up her spear. The silver shuttle-shaped spear naturally appeared in her hand. At the same time, the courteous swordsman launched an attack. It was a very strange swordsmanship. It was simple and effective, but it was a little too strict and even mechanized. This swordsmanship was different from any swordsmanship she had seen in Wound, and it was also different from Brando's swordsmanship she had seen before. This swordsmanship seemed to follow the strictest rules. Every strike had to be based on the trajectory of the previous strike. It seemed easy to predict, but Medisha soon found that she could not parry it. This discovery immediately made her sweat on her forehead. The swordsman suppressed his strength to the same level as her, which was the level of elemental activation and elemental enlightenment. In other words, the swordsman used his swordsmanship to suppress her. This knowledge was difficult for Medisha to accept. She was a silver elf, one of the best at fighting in the world. And the silver elves were not proud of their advantage in absolute strength, but their tireless pursuit of fighting skills. However, the swordsmanship of the swordsman in front of him, or rather, it was an unreasonable swordsmanship. It did not consider the opponent's skills at all. It was just one strike after another. However, every strike was accurately calculated down to the millimeter. There was not the slightest mistake in the connection between each strike and the next. Medisha found that she could not catch any mistakes by the swordsman. On the contrary, she knew that as long as she was careless, she would fall into a situation of no return. The test of a planeswalker was so difficult. The Silver Elf princess regretted it a little. She was even afraid that she would never see Brando again. But ever since the War of the Holy Saints, the self-confidence and unyielding character that she had accumulated for thousands of years made her calm down quickly. She had seen more dangerous situations before. Even when tens of thousands of troops were coming at her, she had never given up. Naturally, she would do the same at this moment. A knight, a lord, and a king needed endless self-confidence. This was especially true for those ancient kings who expanded their territories. Without the support of unswerving faith, they would not have been able to leave their names in the history of the Milky Way. Medisha knew this very well. When this realization flashed in her mind, she found that she seemed to understand her opponent's swordsmanship. The strange swordsman's lightning-fast swordsmanship left a trace in her vision for the first time. Like an instinct, the Silver Elf Princess seized this opportunity. For the first time in this offensive and defensive battle, she took a step forward. With a shout, the spear in her hand pierced through the swordsman's sword shadows and hit him in the chest. The swordsman flew out like a bundle of scattered scarecrows. Only then did Medisha notice that her opponent was actually a construct. But at this moment Medisha heard a soft buzzing sound. She knew that something was wrong and quickly retracted her spear. But she was still a step too late. The swordsman was torn apart in the air. Its four limbs, head and torso were like an exploding clock. Countless strange spherical components flew out from it. As soon as those spherical components appeared in the air, they split open from the middle. A pair of mechanical wings spread out and turned into metal ornithopters. Medisha just had time to take a step back when the sky full of ornithopters flew towards her. She only had time to use her spear to protect her chest and other vital parts. Then she felt a heat on her arm and thigh. The sharp wings of the ornithopters had left a bloody wound there. The Silver Elf Princess did not have time to treat her wound. She immediately turned around and saw that the ornithopters had flown behind her and formed an attack formation in the air. But how could she make the same mistake twice? She roared. "Come down!" Medisha's psionic elemental power was fully activated. A pair of transparent light wings hundreds of meters long unfolded behind her. She swept the light wings horizontally and the metal ornithopters in the air fell to the ground like raindrops. As soon as the ornithopters landed, they folded their wings and turned back into metal spheres. Then under Medisha's gaze they moved closer to each other. With a series of creaking sounds, they reformed into the form of the swordsman from before. Medisha was stunned. She quickly grabbed her spear to prevent the swordsman from launching another attack. But at this time, the swordsman struggled to stand up from the ground and staggered to Medisha. Medisha saw that it had no intention of attacking, and could not help but look at the swordsman curiously. She saw the swordsman slowly bend down and then kneel on one knee. He clenched his right fist and placed it on his chest. He lowered his head and placed his chin on his right fist. It was a gesture of allegiance. Then she saw the swordsman's attributes. Light Wing Guardian Eternal Song IX Light 2. Mana X. Divine Artifact/Divine Creature. When the Light Wing Guardian entered the field, there were X-level indicators on it. When the Light Wing Guardian died, every level indicator on it would place a level 15 colorless divine artifact creature, derived from ornithopters with the ability to fly into the field. At the moment of destruction, the sky is filled with spots of light, as if a saint has descended upon the world. It was a very strange feeling, as if she was looking at the essence of the world. But when Medisha wanted to take a closer look at the card, the whole world distorted. A voice spoke in her mind. Conquering the land begins with conquering the hearts of the people. No king or ruler will fight alone. The solitary wilderness is the end of the world for travelers, but it is also the beginning of another journey. The Solitary Wilderness Eternal Song 19 Earth. The solitary wilderness must be tapped into the field. Tap. Adds 2 points of light magic to your elemental pool. Cycle. Discard this card and draw another card. Existing between what is and what is not. Medisha was stunned for a moment. She turned around and saw Wuxia's gigantic body beside her. She looked back and saw Wuxia's gigantic body coiled around her. She saw the 2 glowing cards of fate hovering in front of her. The evil dragon lowered her head and spoke to her. It seems that you have passed the first test. You have gained your first follower. Just like how every king and lord takes their first step. Next, you will have to build your kingdom and world. I don't understand, Medisha said loudly. The cards of fate should be a projection of the laws of this world, but how can this dream world produce such projections? Wuxia's slender face revealed a cold smile. Wound is also a dream. If the world of mortals cannot be born from it, then everything in the past will be nothing but a bubble. The power of the planeswalkers to create a world is not different from the power of the divine folk and Martha to create the wound. You mean all of this is imaginary? No magic power truly exists. The planeswalkers stole all of this to build their own world. Now that you have the planeswalkers' flame seed, the divine folk call it divinity. You can obtain everything you want from this world. I still don't understand, Lady Wuxia. It's fine. I don't fully understand it either. Perhaps only the divine folk of the first generation can explain the origin of the arena of the gods to you. Alright, we don't have much time left. It's time for you to move on to the next challenge. Your friend is already far ahead of you. She replied. Hippamera? She is an interesting girl. She should not have existed in this era. Your master must be a strange fellow. The laws he knows are very different from ours. Metisha opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but the scenery in front of her changed again. Oh! Chapter 1389. There was a salty smell in the wind like the sea breeze. Then she heard the sound of mountains and tsunamis. The sound was so familiar. It was the echo of the battlefield. She opened her eyes and saw herself standing on the hill. Looking around, there were flags, spears, and knight in shining armor all over the mountain. Leader! Metisha saw the swordsman with a silver mask bowing to her in front of her and said to her in a mechanical tone, Everything is ready. Let's attack the enemies of the holy city. The knight's eyes all looked in this direction. This group of damn human bugs. The rumbling roar echoed repeatedly in the void. The image of the king of purgatory, Aiken, woke up from a nightmare. It suddenly opened its eyes, and its scarlet forehead was covered with fine and dense blood-red sweat beads. Ah! Its entire body suddenly curled into a ball, and it let out a mournful scream. I'm going to kill you all. After another angry roar, the void was shrouded in blood-red lightning, as if the whole world was trembling under the anger. After about 5 or 6 minutes, everything returned to calm. After the lightning dissipated, the demon lord's sturdy body was revealed once again. This monster was gasping for air, and when it raised its head again, the blood-red eyeballs in its pupils had disappeared, leaving behind only a pitch-black void. Although Tao Chica's projection had only inherited a portion of its power, it had spent a lot of time creating these clones under the seal. Furthermore, it had felt the fear and pain of the projection's death, and the backlash from the power had almost cost it its life. Aiken gritted its teeth but soon calmed down. The human young man was amazingly strong. Although it was not sure whether he was a young man or not, because after entering the realm of the sage, appearance was no longer the standard to judge a person's age. As for its projections, although there were still 2 hiding in the Green Sea, they did not pose any threat to the young man, except for courting death. Of course, it still had many believers, and those sheepshead believers were just some cannon fodder ants. I want to imprison that damned human soul forever, and let him suffer under the scorching river. Akinta glanced coldly at the cage that had imprisoned him for thousands of years. I will have the opportunity to listen to his pleas. The scene in the void changed in its vision, and then it saw a boundless sea. In the deep sea there was a string of pearl-like island chains. On Denona Island, the priests of the sheepshead believers were praying. Demons were everywhere on the island. As early as the year of Lining, a group of sheepshead believers came here to build a temple to worship Aiken. The cultists abducted people from the mainland and built villages, ports, and other settlements here. They needed people to serve themselves and on the other hand live sacrifices in the need to develop their believers. That was half a century ago, and now these islands were completely under the control of the sheepshead cult. The undead in Madara's hinterland did not have any fishing industry, so other than the fixed trade routes, there were not many ships in the Green Sea all year round, and very few people knew what happened on these islands. As for the passengers on the ships who strayed into this place because of storms or other reasons, they were either forced to become cultists, or most of them became sacrifices in a live sacrifice ceremony. On the main island of this archipelago, there was the most magnificent temple, and in the center of the temple stood the holy statue of Aiken. But although the demon statue was tall and magnificent, it did not have much of a sense of holiness. The twisted and knotted muscles, long horns, gloomy and terrifying face, and the burrs on the hooves of the lower body gave people a gloomy and depressing feeling. A few tallow candles were burning in the hall, and the dim light intensified this feeling. The priests in black robes were all bowing their heads and praying to their master. A moment later, a huge pressure descended on the hall. "Lando, my servant, are you calling for me?" A dignified and sharp voice rang out in the hall, causing everyone's ears to buzz. Hearing this voice, all the believers in the hall prostrated themselves on the ground, and the priest in the lead quickly replied, "Yes, my respected master." You better have a reason, Aiken said in an unfriendly tone. Master, I'll report the progress of the ceremony to you. We've found the third sealing circle, but we'll need more sacrifices to destroy it. Almost all the people on the island have been gathered together, but there's still a big gap. However, I estimate that it'll take about 2 months, at most 3 months, before we can transport enough replacements from Tao Chica. Aiken snorted coldly, obviously very dissatisfied with the efficiency of his servants. Lando's forehead broke out in a cold sweat. He could tell that his demon master wasn't in a good mood. If he couldn't satisfy him with what he was about to say, even if he didn't lose his life, he was going to have a hard time in the days to come. He hurriedly stuttered, Honorable Master, there's another matter. Speak. A ship has intruded into our waters. Yesterday, our patrol ship spotted this ship at the edge of the Green Sea. Seems to be coming for us. Isn't that perfect? The crew on the ship can be used as living sacrifices. Are you going to waste my time on such a small matter? Aiken said with disdain. No, I wouldn't dare do that, my respected master. It's just, cut the crap. Don't stutter. Lando was shocked and he quickly answered. That ship seems to belong to one of our own. The sails have the emblem of the church, but there is no flag. The ship seems to have come from the Tokik route. Tokik. Aiken's eyes flashed. You didn't make contact with them? Well. Lando was sweating profusely. My dear master, it's like this. I've already ordered the patrol fleet to stop them, but those idiots are useless fools. Hundreds of them were defeated by just a few people. What, is there someone powerful on that ship? It's like this, my respected master. There are a few young people on that ship, and they are very troublesome. Aiken pondered for a moment, then asked, Are they humans? People of Nine Phoenix, crews, or Madara's Dark Nobles? Not Madara's Dark Nobles, my respected master. There are a few people of Nine Phoenix, and there seems to be someone from Erewhon. Aiken closed his dark, empty eyes, then opened them again. He had already guessed who these uninvited guests were. Could it be that these people were here for it? He first felt a trace of panic. Of course, if he was in his original form, he wouldn't be afraid of Brando, but he obviously wouldn't be in such a half-dead state. His projection wouldn't be of any use in a battle of this level. If the enemy's target was him, then they had chosen to attack him at his weakest moment. It was hard for him not to panic. However, he quickly calmed down. He realized that the possibility of this was very small. His seal hadn't been fully opened, and the enemy couldn't possibly harm him through the seal. Even the Bugas and the divine people who sealed him back then didn't have this ability, let alone the weak mortals of this era. But could the enemy be here to strengthen the seal? It didn't look like it, Aiken thought to himself. He didn't see any wizards or similar characters in that group of people, and they were accompanied by a dragon. A dragon! This thought made Aiken realize that he might have found the truth of the matter. The enemy was here for the stagnation realm. I see, he thought to himself. At the same time, a dark thought appeared in his mind. A moment ago, he was still panicking over whether or not the enemy was here for him. But now, he began to realize the hidden opportunity. Very well, Aiken muttered to himself in the void. Perhaps I can use this opportunity to achieve my goal. Damn human bugs, you will regret your actions. If I succeed, I will reward you well. He especially emphasized the last few words. In the hall, Lando strangely found that the pressure that descended on the holy statue had disappeared. Clearly, their demon master had left. But this made the priest Dren feel a little confused. What should he do? The respected master did not give any orders and left without saying a word. Could it be that he was extremely dissatisfied with what he had done? But it didn't seem like it. As far as he knew, the Purgatory Lord was not a patient master. If he said something wrong, he would probably be punished on the spot. But what was the situation now? Not only Lando, but all the sheepshead believers in the hall were confused. Someone asked in a low voice, What do we do next, priest? Well. Lando wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and hesitated. It seems that our esteemed master isn't happy with us. We can't let that ship venture any deeper into the Green Sea. We have to stop them immediately. No. The sharp voice in the void rang again, interrupting Lando. You idiot, let them in. Revered master, I don't quite understand. You don't need to understand, Aiken replied coldly. Go complete your ritual of living sacrifice. But? No buts. Do as I say. The sharp voice once again disappeared in the hall, leaving the sheep's head believers looking at each other. Chapter 1390. The little tail has disappeared. Allah's golden eyes retracted from the sea and said softly. The little female dragon spoke with an elegant tone. She turned her head to look at Brando, her eyes darting around, which made Brando feel overwhelmed. Ever since Allah's knew about his relationship with Delphian, her attitude had undergone a subtle change. This blatant hint made Brando feel a little excited, but at the same time very terrified. He did not hate this little female dragon, but this did not mean that he wanted the relationship between the two to go further, because he felt that it had not reached that point yet. Allah's feelings for him were mixed with more curiosity, and he only regarded her as a mischievous little girl, although her personality was sometimes a little bad. But the dragon's possessiveness was very strong, and Brando knew this very well, which was the source of his headache. Although Allah's body had matured a lot after her coming-of-age ceremony, her figure had become taller, and even her originally flat chest had begun to develop into a smaller size. But no matter how one looked at it, it still made one feel like committing a crime. Dragons were very loyal to their partners, but Brando also knew that Allah's was more following her desires than her rational feelings. He did not want the two to be connected because of a purely physical relationship, and Delphian's incident had already given him a headache. So Brando avoided the little female dragon's gaze without a trace. Miss Delphian stood behind the two like a puppet, her expression indifferent. She turned a blind eye to the little female dragon's various little tricks in front of her and Brando's complicated thoughts. At this time the Prime Minister's daughter behaved like a truly competent maid, ignoring her master's flirtatious thoughts. Although Brando hoped that she could stand up and say a few words at this time. Fortunately, as if sensing his thoughts, Delphian finally spoke at this time. I'm afraid that someone is plotting against us, my lord. What's wrong? Brendel finally broke away from the seductive atmosphere and turned around to ask. There was no one else on the deck. At this time, Huang Hua was practicing her swordsmanship every day, and Feng Qi rarely came to the deck. The two elven girls and Her Royal Highness the Nun Princess should be preparing dinner. As for Mr. Liu, he was most likely with his family's eldest daughter. He was asking about what happened not long ago. Since they took the Byzantine sailing ship from Tokhaik, it was expected that they would be attacked by the sheephead cult at sea. After all, they knew that this sea area was under the control of the sheephead cult. About 5 days ago they found out that their ship was being tracked, and sure enough within a day the sheephead disciples came to kill them, but he taught these guys a profound lesson. In that battle he sank 3 of their ships, and they were almost unscathed. He thought that these guys would stop for a while. It seemed to be the case 2 days ago, but it didn't take long for the sheephead disciples to appear on the route. Until tonight. Although it was said that the sheephead cult had no effect on them, not to mention these motley crew, even their leader here, the Lord of Purgatory Akenta's avatar, did not pose any threat to Brando. However, there were always flies around him, and the buzzing sound was still annoying. Originally Brando had planned to let the little female dragon Allah's teach these guys an unforgettable lesson, but he did not expect that at this time, the other party suddenly disappeared. Brando did not know if the other party realized that they had been discovered, or for some other reason, but suddenly the little tail behind them disappeared, which still made him feel a little uncomfortable. At this time it was evening, and the sea at this time seemed to be a little flat like a mirror. But on the real sea, even if the wind was calm, there were still waves that were not low. The setting sun was divided by these waves, forming a pool of scattered golden light. The golden light reflected on Delphian's face, making the Prime Minister's daughter look particularly serious at this moment. The sheephead cult gathered here is nothing more than a plot to let the Lord of Purgatory, Akentu, return to Wonde. Therefore, the closer to the core area of the Green Sea in theory their control should be tighter, and they would never let a strange ship suddenly break into these core areas. The sheephead cult suddenly withdrew their surveillance on us. They must have other plans, but I don't think this is something they can decide. This matter is related to the resurrection of Akentu, and there is a projection of Akentu's avatar here. It is impossible for such a big matter not to go through the Lord of Purgatory, so, Delphian said until here, pausing for a moment before continuing to answer. I think, unless there is a great change on the island, such as a rebellion, or even something like the sudden fall of the Lord of Purgatory, the Lord of Purgatory must be plotting against us. Obviously, the latter is more likely. Brando also nodded and agreed. Akenta fought with the Lord of Purgatory in Tokik and suffered a big loss. He may have recognized us from the reports of these subordinates. Now he is obviously not the Lord's opponent, so he can only use some tricks. For example, Miss Delphian. It's not easy to guess. He may want to lead us to a certain place. If he is not strong enough, he can only think of a way on the battlefield. You mean he is preparing a trap? This is just a possibility. The Prime Minister's daughter glanced at him faintly. My lord, don't treat me as an omniscient and omnipotent god. After all, there are some things that I can't guess. Brando smiled embarrassedly. He straightened up, glanced at the sparkling golden sea and said, in short, just be vigilant. The side of the ship was now hidden under the huge shadow of the sail. When Brando looked back, he saw the sailors busy on the deck. The sailors on this ship were originally Sheepshead believers, so it was naturally impossible for him to take these people with him on the journey. Fortunately, they were prepared because they knew early on that most of the journey would be spent at sea, so Queen Madara had prepared undead sailors for them before they set off. These sailors were secondary undead summoned through the magic circle. Usually, they only needed to carry the summoning scrolls and materials with them, so there was no need to bring a large group of people with them. When using these sailors, Brando had to sigh that in addition to their inability to reproduce and their tendency to self-destruct, the undead were indeed superior to living beings in many aspects. By the way, why do you want to anchor here? Is this place close to the stagnation realm? Brando asked. It's the riddle of the emerald, my lord, Delphian corrected. The riddle itself is not complicated. It's just a simple substitution encryption. It's just that the characters used for encryption are very rare in Nine Phoenix. I think it should be an ancient language of the Hazel people. Not many people in Wonde understand this language. She paused. But I just learned a little about it. Miss Delphine, is there anything you don't know? A lot. All the knowledge that I don't know. That's almost the same as not saying anything, Brando thought. But Delphian seemed to see through his thoughts and replied. This sentence was said by the third keeper of the Silver Library of the Bugas. I think it's one of the few truths in this world, my lord. Okay, I understand. Then let's go back to the original topic. Brando realized that it was difficult for him to outtalk the Prime Minister's daughter, so he changed the topic. And then, I think this encryption itself was added by a Hazel person later. The complicated thing is the content of the riddle itself after solving it. Get to the point, Miss Delphian. It's a set of calculations to calculate the relative position of the 12 moons in Wonde. Through this set of calculations I can only calculate the place we are now at, which is the sea we see now. Here. Brando was surprised. That means we've arrived? Yes. The Prime Minister's daughter nodded. Brando looked around. There was nothing above the sparkling sea. No land, no islands, not even the slightest bit of reef. But there's nothing here, Alaz said first. Because the Witch King is still below the horizon, Miss Alaz. You mean we have to wait for the tide to ebb? Alaz asked. But this is the middle of the ocean. I can't see any reefs under the water. Are you sure you're not wrong, human woman? The Prime Minister's daughter glanced at the little female dragon, but did not say anything. Brendel felt a sense of unease rising between the two of them, and he quickly waved his hand. All right, stop arguing. It's only 2 to 3 hours until the Shaman King's throne rises. Since those annoying flies have already left, why don't we wait here for a while? Alaz snorted softly in dissatisfaction, and did not speak again. The day on the sea seemed to be longer than on land, but even so, after a simple dinner on the ship, the sun sank below the sea level. In the last part of the day, the surface of the sea changed color rapidly under the sunlight. It changed from a heavy golden color to an intoxicating deep red like wine, and finally to purple. When the purple surface of the sea was gradually replaced by blue and dark blue, until a pitch-black color emerged from the depths, the sky above the sea was already studded with twinkling stars. Brando informed everyone of the news he got from Delphian, so after dinner, everyone came to the deck, including the unexpected passengers on the ship, the half-elf sisters. Everyone gathered on the deck, waiting for the Witch King's throne to rise. Not long after, a thin layer of fog appeared on the sea. Occasionally, fog would appear out of thin air on the sea, but for it to appear out of nowhere on such a sunny day was still surprising. The little female dragon originally wanted to criticize, but seeing this scene, she could not help but feel suspicious. Speaking of which, Feng Qi leaned against the side of the ship and looked at the rising fog that gradually shrouded the entire sea. He couldn't help but ask, "Where exactly is this place? We have already passed the so-called Holy Land of Atuk 3 days ago, right?" "That is only the northern end of the sacred land, Mr. Feng Qi." Princess Magadol was very familiar with this because they had been discussing it almost every day these days. The sacred land of Atuk is a triangular area in this sea, with the main island of Dino and 2 other islands as the fulcrum. This should be the Banazi Sea, and the locals call it the Lunar Gorge. Lunar Gorge? Feng Qi was puzzled. "I think it's more like the Fog Gorge." "Mr. Brando, there you are." At this moment, Lotus of the half-elf sisters suddenly exclaimed. Chapter 1391. "That's the Sorcerer King's throne," Magadol exclaimed. Everyone looked in the direction that Lotus was pointing at, only to see the moon of the sword named Tedessa slowly rising above the pitch-black sea. The moon of swords was the smallest but brightest of the 12 moons. At this moment the silver moonlight was passing through the thin fog, making the fog on the sea appear milky. The moonlight sprinkled on the sails and the sides of the ship, bathing everyone in the silver moonlight. Delphian, who was standing in the crowd, suddenly felt extraordinarily peaceful at this moment. For some reason, she thought of the witch named Krull. And at the 7 o'clock direction of the Moon of Swords, in the southeastern sky of Wonde, the Sorcerer King's throne made up of 17 stars was emitting an even brighter light amidst the little girl's crisp exclamation. The next moment, the clear light fell from the sky like a sharp sword. It fell on the sea, parted the heavy fog, and plowed a wide channel on the dark sea surface. Ah! Faced with the strange scene, even the usually calm Phoenix will let out a low cry. "This is the moon's channel." Brando's eyes reflected the clear light of the Moon of Swords sparkling. The Sorcerer King's throne is the beginning of the witches. When they sailed on the magic sea, they used the light of the 12 moons to guide the way. I didn't expect this legend to be true. My lord is so knowledgeable. Delphian looked at Brando with some surprise. I've only heard some rumors about this legend from Lady Krull. When I was calculating the formula of the mystery of the emerald, I occasionally thought of this matter. In fact, before this, I didn't dare to confirm that the route to the stagnation realm would really appear in such a way. This human is really suspicious. Alaz also glanced at Brendel with dissatisfaction and said in a childish voice, "The channel of the many moons is also one of the most confidential in the knowledge inheritance of the dragon race. Even the Bugas have never figured out how the witches built Bunasong in the Sea of Magic at that time." "Humph, don't tell me you got this document from the Silver Folk again?" Brando suddenly felt something was wrong and coughed heavily. "There is also a moon's channel on the sea between Eloranta and the 10 cities. It can lead to an ancient ruin of the World Tree. The Druids know this very well." "Really? Why don't I know about it?" the little female dragon doubted. "Of course, I assure you," Brando added in his heart. "It's just that the channel hasn't been discovered in this era. In the game, this waterway was only known to the players after the Year of the Swift, and it had only been opened 3 times in total." "Okay." He saw that Alaz was about to say something and hurriedly interrupted the suspicious little female dragon. "Raise the anchor. This channel will only last for less than half an hour before and after the Witch King enters the Moon of Swords. We must hurry." The little female dragon snorted. Delphian was even more surprised because this was exactly the same as her calculation. The undead sailors were very efficient. Less than 5 minutes after Brando gave the order, the sailors raised the anchor and set the sail. There was not much wind on the sea, but an invisible current pushed the ship forward and slowly slid into the channel under the command of Brando. After entering the moon's channel, the fog on both sides of the channel began to thicken. The milky white fog gradually rose and became like a cloud wall. This scene reminded Huang Hua, Feng Qi and the others of the scene when they encountered the lost names when they were in the Swanee Strait. However, Brando told everyone that this was just pure sea fog. But if they deviated from the channel and entered the fog, they would soon leave the moon's channel and return to the sea where they started. The ship traveled for about a quarter of an hour on this empty waterway. This time, in addition to the time wasted before entering the waterway, was exactly half an hour as Brendel predicted. At this time, the Shaman King's throne had already passed through the Moon of Swords and entered the 10 o'clock direction of the Moon of Swords. At this time, the scenery on the sea changed again. Everyone on the ship saw that in the southeast of the Witch King's throne, there was an orange moon rising on the sea. This moon was slightly bigger than the Moon of Swords to Dessa, and the shadow on the moon was clearly visible. The golden sea of the Moon of Eternal Darkness. Princess Magadal said in surprise. She had systematically studied astronomy when she was in cruise. Of course, she knew that the golden sea would not appear in the first half of the night during this season. At this time, Delphian, who was behind them, did not say a word. She frowned as if she was calculating something. Alaz was extremely dissatisfied with this annoying human woman. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she did not expect Brando to stop her. "Don't disturb her, she's calculating the channel. I thought this human woman would have calculated it a long time ago. What has she been doing these days?" "This is not the same, Alaz." Brando sighed. "You know, the Golden Sea will not appear in the first half of the night during this season. This is not the real Golden Sea. No, to be exact, this is the real Golden Sea, not the projection we saw on the Magic Sea in Wonde. Normal people would not be able to see such a scene. Before coming here, this route could not be calculated. This is what the druids told you." The little female dragon raised her eyebrows. "Probably," Brando said half-heartedly. "I see," Huanghua said as if she had understood something. "This is the most difficult part of the mystery of the emerald. If we did not have Miss Delphian, even if we found this place, we would never be able to enter the realm of stagnation, right? Of course, otherwise why would I have proposed to work with Miss Delphian?" Feng Qi snorted. "Miss Delphian is a true genius, but some people do not know it." As he said this, he looked at Brando maliciously. Brando pretended that he did not see it. At this time, he knew that this Prime Minister's daughter was definitely worthy of the title of genius. When the players first entered this channel, they used auxiliary means, but this Prime Minister's daughter not only calculated by force, but also seemed to be calculating mentally. This ability was a little too terrifying. Miss Delphian is indeed a rare woman. Mr. Liu also agreed and looked at Brando with some admiration. He did not know the inside story. He only thought that Brando's personal charm was so outstanding that even such an outstanding woman was dead set on him. Brando could not explain and could only remain silent. After a short while, Delphian looked up and said, "Take the channel between the Witch King's throne and the Moon of Eternal Darkness. The angle is 17 degrees. Brando immediately passed down the order. The ship began to change direction. At this time, he turned back to look at the Prime Minister's daughter. Obviously, the complicated calculation had taken a toll on her. Delphian frowned slightly. Her face was pale under the moonlight, and fine beads of sweat could be seen on her forehead. He knew that at this time, if this Prime Minister's daughter deliberately set a wrong angle, they would immediately be expelled from this channel. The moon channel was very special. The same person could only enter this place once a year, and such a huge calculation error was normal. Even if Delphian was wrong, they could not blame her. But he did not know why. But when he saw the Prime Minister's daughter's calm purple eyes, he subconsciously chose to believe her. When the ship parted the surface of the sea and headed towards the intersection between the Shaman King's throne and the Golden Sea, a strange scene appeared on the surface of the sea. The layers of fog suddenly parted, and their original route disappeared into the fog. A brand new route appeared before them. Most of the people on the ship were shocked speechless. Princess Magadal muttered to herself, "This is really an unpredictable power." "Look," Lotus said in surprise. "Isn't that the Sheep's Head Island?" Unlike her cold-faced elder sister, the little girl leaned on the side of the ship and looked at the scene in front of her curiously. She pointed at a shadowy island in the distance in the fog and shouted. Even the cracked glasses on her face almost fell into the sea. Had it not been for the little sprite on her shoulder, she would have fallen into the sea with her quick reflexes. "Thank you, Mr. Lute." "You're welcome." But be careful, falling into the sea is not a joke. Lute replied. I'll be careful. Lotus replied, but she did not seem to be afraid at all. Instead, it was her stern-faced sister who came over and pulled her back. At this time, the others also noticed the island that the half-elf girl was talking about. The outline really does look like the Sheep's Head Island, Phoenix was said in surprise. But didn't we pass by that area 2 days ago? Have we been going in circles in this area for the past 2 days? I don't think so, Princess Magadal said with a frown. I think it's because of the strange power here. Brando nodded, surprised by the nun princess's keen observation. That's more or less the case. We are no longer in the prime material plane of Wonde. The moon's channel is a very special area. And it is said that it has some connection with the Sea of Magic. So we can assume that the space here is twisted, and it may be connected in all directions. The Sheep's Head Island that we see is just one of its exits. If we sail in that direction, will we reach the Sheep's Head Island? Maybe, but it's also possible that we will reach a mirror world of Wonde. Brando recalled the player's encounter and replied, That world is empty, but it looks exactly like Wonde. Oh. Chapter 1392. This possibility sounded chilling, and in fact the players who strayed into that world were also terrified. Wonde's mirror world was a completely dead world. There was no life, no magic flow, and even the elements were dead. Some people said that it was the legendary kingdom of the dead, but the players had never found the existence of the river Styx there. Brando knew that there were many such planes in Wonde, and the stagnation realm was only one of them. Alaz said that the stagnation realm was bigger than Wonde itself, and he did not know if this statement was correct. How could there be such a world? After listening to Brando's explanation, the girls' faces were a little pale. When the ship entered a new channel, the moon of the sword Tadisha mysteriously disappeared, and 3 moons appeared in the sky. One of them was the blue moon of the shield Octavia, and the other was the extremely rare moon of the shield. This moon was not any of the 13 moons, and in an older era, people even thought that it was a meteor. This moon of the shield rarely appeared in the sky of Wonde, and it was said that it only appeared once every 30 years. Delphian once again fell into silence. The light of the 3 moons spilled on the silent channel, and the sea surface was brightly lit, and the waves seemed to be glowing with silver light. At this time, everyone already knew that the Prime Minister's daughter's work was more important, so no one disturbed her. The little female dragon stared blankly at the sea surface. Her golden eyes reflected a soft silver light. She suddenly turned around and asked Brando weakly, Brando, can we really see Flora again? Brando was stunned, and the image of the somewhat indifferent girl appeared in his mind. He recalled the first time he met Alaz and Flora. At that time it was still in the fairies' holy ruins, and the little female dragon gave him a golden apple maliciously. That golden apple later became the link between him, Alaz, and Scarlet. Of course, he replied. There were many abilities in this world that could affect the mind, but they were almost all the abilities of the gods. These abilities were difficult to deal with, and some even existed forever once they took effect. This time his opponent was the Twilight Dragon. But Brando did not give up hope in his heart. He was a player, and players were destined to not bow to any difficulties in the game. Brendel, Alaz whispered, am I being selfish? I should have suffered this punishment with Falfa, but now I've left her alone. I'm sorry for the oath I made with her. Alaz. Brendel knew that the little female dragon had always felt guilty. Dragons were extremely loyal to their partners, and Falofa's act of saving her from the dragon god Bahamut was like a thorn in her heart. If you give up, you'll be letting Falofa down. I understand. Alaz sighed. Her somewhat young face reflected a layer of fluorescent light. Thank you, stinky human. The torches inserted into the walls of the deep corridor were particularly dim. Soon the sound of hollow but slightly hurried footsteps echoed. Priest Lando hurried through the corridor and pushed open a heavy door at the end of the corridor, and shouted in a hurried tone. Respected master, as you expected, they have entered the Holy Land. Humph! Behind the door, a cold snort echoed in the central temple of Dino Island. Get to the point, idiot. Lando was holding a black crystal ball in his hand, and the surface of the crystal ball was reflecting the scenery of the sea near Sheephead Island. Sheephead Island was the main island of the farthest chain of islands northeast of the Dino archipelago. The disciples of Sheephead Island built a spire there to monitor the nearby waterways, hence the name of the island. At this moment the sea near Sheephead Island was filled with fog, and the bright moonlight hung down from the sky, as if forming a dazzling passage in the fog. Although Lando did not see anything in the passage of light, because the channel of the moons would block the view when it was opened, he at least understood that the channel of the moons would not open for no reason. The disciples of Sheephead Island kept such a close watch on the holy land of Atuk, and in the past few months, only one ship had broken in. They did not open the channel of the moons, so it was not hard to imagine who did it. The hall was silent for a while, and Akenta seemed to be staring at the scene in the crystal ball, and then he replied coldly, "Very good, you did well this time, Lando, my servant." Lando thought that it had nothing to do with him, those people obviously broke in on their own. He knew that his demon master was in a good mood, but demons were often temperamental, so he said nervously, "But respected master, if they continue to move forward, I'm afraid." "Don't be afraid, I don't think they would dare to make a big fuss about the magic circle," Akenta said in a good mood. "You can go now, this is your reward." Just as he finished speaking, Lando felt a fiery power hit him squarely in the chest. He almost fell to the ground, but the priest of Sheephead Island held back and did not dare to show any disrespect. His face was fiery red, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. After a while he took a deep breath and said in surprise and joy, "Please accept my sincere gratitude, my respected master. You are the greatest existence." After that, he bowed slightly and hurried out of the hall. The hall fell silent again. After a few seconds a cold voice said, "You're wasting your power, Akenta. The power you gave him won't work at all. I need these servants to do something for me that I can't do. You don't understand these lowly little guys, Lady Dragon. If you don't give them some benefits, they won't work for you sincerely. What can they do?" "Haha," Akenta laughed proudly. "There are some things you can't do yourself, so you need servants. These mortals are very good at greed and enslaving people. I'm just taking advantage of the situation. This is why you demons have repeatedly failed that great existence for thousands of years. Look at your despicable faces. You are so proud of the fact that you have become the natives of this world. Don't compare me with those brainless long-legged crystals. We use schemes to seize this world. How did the Silver Plains get destroyed? It's all thanks to us demons." Akenta seemed to be angered by these words. Of course, he knew that the Twilight Dragon was disappointed by the demon's inaction for thousands of years. He screamed in fear and anger. "I don't need you traitors to remind me of this. This time I will find a way to enter the stagnation realm. Unless you guys are deliberately dragging me down. We will not do such a boring thing," the cold voice in the darkness replied. "This is the reason why it is disappointed in all of you. You have become impure. This has deviated from the original intention of chaos." "Shut up," Akenta replied hatefully. "Save this for that damn she-wolf Ekis. Let's see if she will bite your neck off." The cold voice did not speak again. After a few minutes, a woman slowly walked out of the darkness. She looked to be a young girl at most. Her long black hair was as if it had been soaked in ink, without the slightest luster. However, she had a pair of beautiful silver eyes. There seemed to be some memories of the past hidden in these eyes, but they disappeared after a slight flicker. She was followed by two other slender women. Judging from the tiny blackened scales on their foreheads, cheeks, and arms, there was no doubt that they were all dragons. "I hope you won't disappoint that lord again." The girl looked up at Akenta's statue and said lightly. Then she turned around and walked out of the corridor without looking back. Behind her, the Lord of Purgatory let out an extremely suppressed roar of anger. The ship had turned several degrees in just a few short hours. The moonlight on the sea was getting brighter and brighter. 12 magic moons appeared on the sea one after another. Every time a new moon rose from the sea, Delphian would do a new round of calculations, and then let the ship move in the direction of the angle between the 3 moons. The shield moon soon disappeared and was replaced by the winter moon Otis and the rain moon Agatha. The arrogant Agatha was Ekka's 10th daughter. After the moon that represented her appeared, the fog on the sea disappeared and many reefs appeared on the sea. The tall and majestic ship seemed to be moving slowly in a strait full of rocks. It was as if the sailboat had entered a thin layer of mist. When the sailboat came out of the mist, Everyone noticed the changes in the scenery in front of them. Under the moonlight, the countless jagged rocks made everyone speechless. What is this place? This doesn't look like the Green Sea. We have never seen this place before. Princess Magadal could not help but ask. I know where this place is, Alaz said. These rocks. These are not reefs. This is the dragon's graveyard. What? Everyone was stunned. In Wonde, the dragon's graveyard was one of the most mysterious places. Some even believed that this place did not exist at all and was just an illusory legend. However, the truth was that when the dragons since the end of their eternal lifespan, they would mysteriously leave their clan. Very few people, including the dragons themselves, would know where the elderly dragons who left their clan went. Oh, Chapter 1393. It was about the dragon's graveyard. There was a saying that there was a dragon graveyard outside the elemental boundary, and all the dragons would come here before they died of old age and turned into bones. This saying was actually more widespread among the dragons, and Alaz knew from her own bloodline that there was such a place in a corner of the vast world. But even she did not expect to enter the dragon's graveyard under such circumstances. Why are we here? Someone asked. The little female dragon also shook her head, indicating that she did not understand. This mysterious place also shocked her, even more than the others on the ship, because of the resonance of the dragon's bloodline in her heart. It made her understand that this place would one day be the home of all of them. But for some reason Alaz turned back and looked at Brando. Both of them simultaneously thought of the dragons that were thrown in the direction of Tauchika by the Twilight Dragon, including Flora. Were those dragons related to this place? Both of them deeply felt a sense of being shrouded in a conspiracy. The little female dragon seemed a little scared, which was a rare emotion in her. Brando seemed to have noticed that Alaz was shivering beside him, and for some reason, he subconsciously grabbed her hand. Alaz shivered for a moment but quickly calmed down, and a mist rose from her face. We did not come here by the will of the Twilight Dragon, Brando replied in a low voice. It was Lady Martha who ordered us to come here and look at those bones. Countless of your ancestors are watching us, and the ancestral spirits will bless us to achieve the final victory. Yes. Alaz nodded, feeling a little courage in her heart. After a while she suddenly said, Brando, did you feel strange just now? Strange? I feel that the moonlight of the moon of magic is not leading the way for us. The answer to the mystery of the Emerald Sea may not be just these channels. The 12 moons of the magic sea are there, outside the elemental boundary of Wonde. It has been shining on our world for thousands of years. Why would they lead the way for us? You mean? After the rise of Agatha, we passed through the water curtain. Before and after the rise of Agatha, there was a clear deviation in the position of the ship. Node? Brando was stunned for a moment before he suddenly reacted. One-way teleportation door. He immediately turned around and saw a faint shadow in the shadow left behind by the ship. To be exact, it was a light curtain. The light curtain itself was semicircular, but that was not its original shape. It was a strange scene formed by Agatha's moonlight shining on the spatial fault. All of this indicated that there was a one-way portal there. But it was fading away. So that's how it is. Brando suddenly understood that the dragons must have left such a masterpiece here. They used the relationship between space and magic to transform a one-way portal. Only at a certain moment, when the moonlight from different moons, or rather the dark magic, shone on the portal in a special direction, would the portal open. This was the lunar waterway. Delphian, he said immediately. The Prime Minister's daughter had been paying attention to the conversation between the two and immediately nodded. It turned out that behind the calculation of the Jade Riddle, there were several spatial nodes that existed here. After understanding this, calculating the next node was much easier than simply calculating the astronomical landscape. She immediately settled down and began to calculate the next formula, which was actually starting to be a little strenuous for her. It was not just a simple mental exhaustion, because when she first bathed in the moonlight of the Moon of Swords, she felt a strange calling. In the darkness she saw a grotesque country. 12 women were watching her. One of them was a blind person, a pair of twins, and a little girl. The little girl smiled and said to her, "Welcome, our new companion. Do you see it? This is a sword, it's called Sevet, the meaning of the sage in the ancient runes. This is the auxiliary sword, the supreme inheritance of Tadisha. Me? My name is Micaiah, nice to meet you. The pure and flawless moonlight shone directly into her heart. Brando looked at the fine beads of sweat on Delphine's pale forehead. Princess Magadal could not bear to see it and kept wiping the sweat away. But even so, the sweat still flowed down her cheeks. Miss Delphine, do you need to rest? The Prime Minister's daughter shook her head weakly and said with a hoarse voice, There's not enough time, the lunar waterway could disappear at any time. Now I can confirm that this waterway leads to the stagnation realm. This is the answer to the jade riddle. I understand, Alaz suddenly said. The last moon of the 12 moons is Timmy's. Timmy's is Ekis' youngest daughter. The heretic moon Timmy's is pale green in the reflection of the sea of magic. The jade waterway, Phoenix Hua also reacted. Is that the last waterway to the stagnation realm? How many waterways have we passed through? Agatha is the 10th moon. Otis is Ekis' 9th daughter. The next waterway is Castinia and Timmy's waterway. Wait, I have a question, Feng Qi suddenly said. But shouldn't the first moon be Ko Hua? I know that. Princess Magadal was very knowledgeable in astronomy and said, because the first moon that the witches sensed after the Witch King's throne was the moon of Shield. Before the first era, the sailors still set the first month of the year as the first month of the year when the moon of Shield rose in the middle of the night. Thus, the calendar used by the sailors was different from ours until the Year of Thunder. The White City region uses this calendar, so their new year is later than ours by about 2 months. Knowing that they were about to solve the riddle of the emerald and enter the world of stagnation, everyone on the ship couldn't help but feel a little nervous, because at this moment, every one of them had to rely on Delphine's calculations. The Prime Minister's daughter was already on the verge of collapse, but what was admirable was that she had been accurate in every calculation before this. Along with nervousness came excitement, especially for Phoenix Hua, Feng Qi, and Mr. Liu. The Jade Waterway was the oldest and most widespread legend in the 9 Phoenix. This legend was related to the true inheritance of the Eastern Kingdom, and for thousands of years, countless people had spent their entire lives on it. And at this moment, the mystery of this legend was about to be revealed in front of them. Mr. Feng Qi. At this moment, Phoenix Hua suddenly spoke. The Ironheart swordsmanship has always been the strongest among the 9 Phoenix sects. After obtaining the complete inheritance, what plans does the Ghost Chariot clan have next? Feng Qi was stunned. He did not expect his cousin to ask him such a question. After thinking for a moment, he replied, In your eyes, we must be evil beyond redemption? My swordsmanship teaches me to judge with my heart, not with hearsay. Then what do you think? I don't know. Feng Qi shook his head and did not answer. Not far away from them, Lotus looked curiously at the people of the 9 Phoenix. Although she had read some documents about the 9 Phoenix Kingdom in the library of the church, she lacked understanding of the culture and history of this country. In fact, this was the common understanding level of most people in the world of Wond. An existence like Brando was very rare for the Wond of this era. Ling stood expressionlessly beside his sister, indifferent to the conversation of others. Compared to the excitement, nervousness, and uneasiness of the people of the 9 Phoenix, Brando did not seem so optimistic. As if noticing the look on his face, the little female dragon beside him asked, Are you still worried about the Twilight Dragon? No, Brando shook his head. There are still dangers on the last waterway. The real challenge has not yet begun. How do you know? Alaz asked curiously. Because the moon's waterway was actually a dungeon. Brando wanted to answer that. There was no dungeon without a little bit of danger, and the first half of the moon's waterway was mainly composed of solving puzzles. In the second half, they had to kill their way through with real swords and spears. The danger of the moon's waterway mainly came from the last route, because it was conceivable that the exit of the last one-way portal must be in the Sea of Magic, and it was easy to guess what was in the Sea of Magic. And Brando believed that there must be a reason why the Tomb of the Dragon was arranged before the last checkpoint of the moon's waterway. The dragons were the warriors of the gods. Just like the lost names, even after they died, their spirits would still fight to protect the world. He had not forgotten that the Lord of Purgatory, Akentu, was also sealed in this place. If it was just a coincidence, it would be too far-fetched. On the moon's waterway between Eloranta and the 10 cities, the Void Predator Balia slept on the last section of the route. Here above the green sea, what would they face? Brando turned his head and just saw Delphian open her eyes. A dazzling light flashed in her light purple eyes. Found you, the Prime Minister's daughter said firmly and slowly. At this time, Brando raised his hand and interrupted the voices of the others. He did not immediately let the undead sailors change their course, but drew his sword and said, "Everyone get ready to fight." Chapter 1394. As if to prove Brando's words, the originally calm sea began to ripple. The wide channel became narrow, and an undercurrent appeared between the reefs. The current washed against the bottom of the ship, and the ship shook violently. The undead sailors on the deck suddenly swayed, and the wooden barrels, ropes, and boxes that were piled up on the deck fell into the sea. "Feng Qi, you go and operate the sails." Brando knew that the undead sailors were not reliable in such a situation. They were too weak, and he gave several orders. "Magadol, bring Ling and Lotus to the bottom of the cabin. Phoenix Fire, protect Delphian. The rest of you put the undead sailors in the bottom of the cabin. They are useless on the deck, so let them pump the water." Feng Qi knew a little about sailing, and operating the sails was not a problem, but in the Nine Phoenix, that was the job of the sailors and servants. He grumbled and walked away. The others quickly moved as well. "Let me stay on the deck," Ling said with a straight face. "Mr. Brendel, I've been a sailor for a period of time, I can help." Brando glanced at Feng Qi. He knew that the ship could not rely on one person to operate the ropes, but he was worried about leaving the little girl on the deck. If she accidentally fell into the sea, no one would be able to save her. "Let me protect her." The little fairy lute flew up from Lotus's shoulder and said. Brando nodded. Feng Qi's strength was not bad, and under his control, the ship finally stabilized. The non-combatants on the deck, except for the Prime Minister's daughter, quickly went down to the cabin below. Although the deck was still very bumpy, Brando walked to the side of the ship as if it was flat ground, and looked up at the scene above the sea. As the ship sailed against the undercurrent, and gradually went deeper into the channel, the reefs on the sea began to become fierce. They stretched out into the dark night sky, like the sharp teeth or claws of a monster. These reefs gradually revealed their original appearance, the bones of a dragon, the horns, ribs, or the spine exposed above the sea. The sea seemed to have become conscious, and Brando saw another undercurrent coming from the 2 o'clock direction of the ship. It merged with the original undercurrent and formed a huge whirlpool. Far away from the whirlpool, Brando could see even more currents, and in that direction, the surface of the sea was filled with potholes of various sizes. If it was not pushed in that direction by the currents, the ship would have been smashed into pieces in an instant. The sky became even darker, as if it was mixed with a violent storm. Lightning and thunder could be seen from the clouds above from time to time. Brendel did not notice when the clouds had accumulated in the night sky. The clouds blocked out the starlight, and the sea surface was so dark that it was impossible to see one's fingers. Lightning flashed through the darkness and occasionally lit up the surface of the sea, showing Brendel the raging waves. Brendel pursed his lips, but his expression was calm. This is not an ordinary storm, but a strong convective weather caused by the disordered space. The undercurrent on the sea also comes from this, which means that there is a spatial fault not far from here. In theory, a one-way portal is actually a spatial fault, but the portal is generally more stable. It seems that the situation in front of us is much more complicated than this. What is a strong convective weather? Alaz asked. Brando glanced at her. Don't you have any impression of the dragon's tomb? There are a lot of impressions, but they are all vague memories. This is a bloodline inheritance, like an innate memory but not complete. However, unlike you humans, who will gradually lose their embryonic state or childhood memories as they grow older, the memories of us dragons will gradually stabilize as we grow older. This is also why the coming-of-age ceremony is so important to us. Say something useful, my lady. Don't you think it's too much of a killjoy to discuss the inheritance of the dragon clan in this situation? We may be doomed at any time. You seem to think that I'm calm, but in fact it's all an act. I'm scared to death now. Brando heard the creaking sound of the hull, as if it would be torn apart at any time, and then looked at the little female dragon with an indifferent face. He could not help but have a headache. This little female dragon sometimes behaved pitifully, sometimes carelessly, and was really a headache. Alaz was amused by Brando's words and giggled, revealing her snow-white little fangs, as if she was even more heartless. She replied breathlessly, You're really interesting stinky human, you're scared? I've never seen a human bolder than you. You even dared to kill a demon lord. And His Majesty the Emperor of the Empire can't do anything to you. Okay, don't stare at me like that, let me think, what do you want to know? Is there only one dragon's tomb in Wonde? Brando guessed that this dragon's tomb must be of special significance, but why was it hidden in the moon's channel, guarding the door of the last channel? What was the meaning of this? But he could not guess the reason. No, there's more than one, Alaz shook her head and said. In fact, seriously, this doesn't seem like a simple dragon's tomb. What? I just thought this was a dragon's tomb because I recognized the skeletons of my kind from the beginning, but something's not quite right. I can't describe the specific feeling, Alaz said with a frown. I can only say that this is not so much a dragon's tomb but a battlefield. A battlefield of my kind. A battlefield of dragons. Brando was taken aback, and a faint understanding flashed in his heart. What did you think of? Alaz asked him with her head tilted. But at this time Feng Qi's shout came from the stern. Be careful. Brando turned his head, and the Prime Minister's daughter, who had been frowning, also looked up at this time. Everyone on the deck saw that the sailboat suddenly went straight forward, and in the middle of the two huge whirlpools in front of them, the sea seemed to be distorted, and the sea and the reefs gathered together in that direction, stretching in one direction, and the sea level seemed to have formed a strange arc, a spatial fault. The little female dragon was the first to react. But the sailboat still rushed in, and everyone on the deck felt the hull shake violently, and a glimmer swept across not far above their heads. Then they heard a creaking sound, and it turned out that the three masts broke together, and were swept into the spatial turbulence behind the hull. Brando turned his head, and before he could see anything clearly, he only felt a fog on both sides of the hull, and a gray shadow shot at him from the fog. He reacted quickly, sidestepping, and with a flash of the sword in his hand, the gray shadow was split into two by the sudden appearance of the holy sword Odorfice. Accompanied by the dull sound of a heavy object hitting the deck, the gray shadow revealed its figure. It was a strange monster. It looked a bit like an octopus, but its tentacles were sturdier and full of sharp teeth. What the hell is this? Feng Qi came from the other side, holding a similar monster in his hand. As he spoke, he wiped his sword with some disgust. The viscous liquid slowly flowed from the shining blade, dripping onto the wooden deck, making a sizzling sound, and then a puff of white smoke. This is a void predator, an evil creature born in the chaos. They are also the minions of dusk, but void predators can only live in the chaos, so they do not exist in the elemental frontier. Void predators have no form, they are part of the chaos. The shape we see now is just a projection. Brando inserted a rusty machete into the monster's mouth, pried open its upper jaw, and frowned at its slender tongue, which looked like a dead snake. The scimitar was quickly corroded. He let go of the scimitar and looked up. The ship was sailing in a foggy world, but it was very different from the fog that separated the two sides of the channel in the Crescent Gorge. The gray fog formed the entire world here. The fog billowed and formed the shape of a wave. Sometimes the diameter of the wave was several kilometers. It was impossible to see the end of the wave at a glance. Void predators came and went in this fog to hunt. They had a wide range of food, in fact they could directly devour elements and magic. Brando felt that the environment here was very similar to the scenery he saw outside the elemental frontier, from the shallow sea to the mountain of ceasing storms, but there were no mountain-like rocks floating in the void. We have reached the last route, and as I expected, this is the Sea of Magic, Brando said worriedly. You don't sound too happy? Brando kicked the corpse of the void predator back into the fog. The void predators will not invade the Wonde. They are the original species of the Sea of Magic, and the dragons have no reason to fight with them. Besides, they are too weak. The dragons fight with them? What fight? Feng Qi was puzzled. After passing through the spatial rift, the situation around them had stabilized, and there were no more violent currents or storms. Although he did not know what the fog was, he did not want to take on such a lowly task, and only waited for Lu Zilong and Magadol to bring the undead sailors back. Isn't it good to be weak? This is the last part of the moon's channel. Brando suddenly stopped, and found that he did not know how to explain. The moon's channel was a relatively high-level dungeon, and in theory it should not be this simple. Looking at the level of these void predators according to the game's calculations, they were not even level 40, and were too low level to be monsters at the entrance. Oh! Chapter 1395. Thinking of this, Brando could only take out the content of his conversation with Alaz and explain. That's easy, Feng Qi said. This is the entrance to the stagnation realm, right? The dragons are fighting here, not necessarily to stop something from invading the wound, but also to protect the gate to the stagnation realm. He suddenly shut his mouth with a strange expression. Yes, to protect the gate to the stagnation realm. Then what about the invaders? Why were there only dragon skeletons in the graveyard? Feng Qi's expression also turned ugly. If that was the case, the invaders might have already entered the stagnation realm. Then what was the point of them, the latecomers, finding the stagnation realm? The things inside might have already been looted clean. That's only one of the possibilities. Brando saw Feng Qi's expression and knew that he had figured it out, so he said, but the invaders might not have left the stagnation realm. What do you mean? I'm thinking. Maybe the invaders haven't left the stagnation realm. What? Alaz, what's wrong? Brando then noticed that the little female dragon had been silent ever since they passed through the spatial fault. He looked back and saw that Alaz had a rare serious expression. That spatial fault is a one-way portal. Alaz was silent for a moment before answering. Brando nodded, but thought in his heart, isn't this obvious? But it's a little different from the previous portals. Brando's heart skipped a beat and asked, did you notice anything? It's a sealed portal. When we passed through it, it verified my lineage. Wait, you mean, I'm a dragon? Alaz said with a trembling voice. Brando, dragons are the key to opening that portal. You're talking about Falafa? Brindle immediately understood what she meant. The little female dragon nodded heavily. She suddenly became a little nervous. She grabbed Brando's arm and said, Brando, I felt the presence of Fuluafa just now. She must have been here. Hiss! Brendel sucked in a breath of cold air, feeling as if his arm was clamped by 2 iron clamps. He hurriedly said, relax, Alaz. Since Flora is here, we will meet her eventually. The little female dragon froze for a moment, as if she had just realized her gaffe. She hurriedly let go of Brando's arm and said, sorry, Brando, I was too excited. I understand, but if we want to save Miss Flofa, it's best to stay calm at all times, Brando comforted. Alaz then nodded. Brando raised his head and looked around. His heart was a little heavy. Compared to Alaz, he thought further and further. The dragons enslaved by Flora and the Twilight Dragon from the battlefield of Rushta had arrived here. Or at least they had been here before. What were their intentions? In addition, there was the Purgatory Lord. What role did Akinta play in this? He increasingly felt that it was not a coincidence that these suspicious points appeared together in this place. What was the stagnation realm? Could it really be, as Alaz said, that it was just a broken old world that belonged to a past era? But why would the Twilight Dragon show so much interest in this broken world? What kind of secrets were hidden in it? Was it really for the Orb of Nature? He shook his head inwardly. The Twilight Dragon had obtained the Scepter of Nature from the Dragon Queen before. Although the Twilight Dragon appeared to be angry, it did not seem to have much desire for it. Besides, it already knew that more than half of the 7 holy swords were with him. Why would it look for the Orb of Nature? Brando carefully recalled every detail of the brief confrontation with the Twilight Dragon that day. He suddenly remembered something and muttered to himself. The secret behind the world? What is that? Why would it be interested in this? Haku seemed to have said that it was the key to the survival of Wound. The Twilight Dragon chose to take the risk to come to this world, and even did not hesitate to use the Roman as its incarnation. It seemed to be for this so-called secret. At this time, Brando suddenly had an idea that he could not suppress. Could it be that the stagnation realm hides the secret behind Wound? He vaguely felt that he had grasped the key to the problem, but he was faintly frightened. He might be involved in an important event that could change the history and future of Wound. But what was the secret behind it? After a moment of absent-mindedness, when Brando came back to his senses, Feng Qi had already dealt with a few more void predators on the deck. The grotesque corpses were piled up on the deck. Princess Magadal, Mr. Liu and the others who had returned to the deck were ordering the undead sailors to throw them over the side of the ship. The Void Reavers didn't have any valuable spoils of war, aside from the power of chaos and pure dark magic that they couldn't use. A few minutes later, the hull of the ship suddenly shook slightly, and everyone on the deck stopped. "What's going on?" Brando asked. "Mr. Brando, the ship seems to have hit something." Ling's flat voice came from the stern of the ship. Brendel paused for a moment, then quickly ran to the side of the ship to take a look. Only then did he realize that under a thin layer of fog, there was a shallow layer of water. The front half of the ship was stranded. "There's land." Phoenix's voice came from the bow of the ship. The others also looked in all directions and soon found that the ship had rushed to the shore. Brando was still wondering how the land appeared when he heard Magadol and Phoenix's voice calling his name. "Mr. Brando, teacher, come and take a look. The land here is strange." "What's going on? We have never seen such a strange place. The ground here seems to be made of glass." "Glass?" Brando came to the bow of the ship and looked down from the mast. He was stunned. Just as Phoenix's Flame and Magadol said, the land that caused the ship to run aground was very strange. To be precise, the land did not seem to have a physical body. It was made up of crisscrossing grid lines. Each grid was about 10 meters long, and between the crisscrossing lines was pitch black. It was a bit like the game models that he had seen in the past. But this scene made him think of the world of laws that he had seen in the extreme planes when he entered the Supreme Realm. There, the lines of laws intersected with each other on the other side of the world to form the wound. The back of the world. He muttered to himself. "We haven't left the last channel yet." The Prime Minister's daughter followed behind him. She seemed to have heard his muttering and whispered, "This is not the stagnation realm." "You heard that?" Brando suddenly turned around and looked into the purple eyes of the Prime Minister's daughter. That pair of charming eyes was completely different from the eyes of the Cruz people. It was said that she had inherited part of the Myrna people's bloodline. "I have also been to the elemental boundary," Delphian replied calmly. "My lord, have you forgotten?" Brando took a deep breath. "Get off the ship." He then firmly ordered, "Be careful. There may be more monsters outside." Other than the undead sailors, everyone got off the ship. Ling and Lotus were no exception. Brando actually had the thought of abandoning the ship. The ship was stranded here, and they did not have the ability to repair it. Although it was easy to return the ship to the sea, the damaged keel and the bottom of the ship were difficult to repair. It was a mistake that they did not bring a carpenter and a boatman with them. The passengers on the ship came to the surface one by one. Most of them were very surprised. "This is not glass." Magadol carefully examined the ground under her feet and said with certainty, "It doesn't seem to be material, but it is solid." Huanghua squatted down and used her small white hands to touch the ground inch by inch. She then raised her head and said to the others in a calm voice, "Teacher Miss Magadol, the ground is not flat. It is still bumpy, but we can't see it with our naked eyes." "Then we must always pay attention to our feet," Brando replied. He walked to the bottom of the ship and touched the water with his fingertips. The clear water quickly evaporated along his fingers. "This is not water, this is magic." He immediately came to a conclusion. This is the Sea of Magic. The others also understood. "But Mr. Brando, why is there land in the Sea of Magic?" "As far as I know, the Sea of Magic itself does not have a specific shape in existence. It is the name of the chaos and dark magic outside the wound." Brando also could not answer this question. He felt more and more that this place was mysterious. He straightened up and saw Alaz moving in a direction. He quickly shouted, "Alaz, what are you doing?" The little female dragon turned around and waved at him anxiously. "Come here, I think I saw Fuluafa." "Wait." Brando vaguely felt that something was wrong. But just as he was about to call the little female dragon back, he saw that she had already gone around a dark hill and disappeared. "Damn it. What should we do, Mr. Brando?" Magadol asked anxiously. "Is Alaz in danger?" "It's okay, we can still catch up." Brando looked in the direction. It was not far from here, and he could catch up in the blink of an eye. However, Alaz's disobedience made him extremely unhappy. He could not help but complain, "That damned girl, I'll teach her a lesson later." Chapter 1396. No one spoke. Obviously, anything that happened in this strange place would not make anyone happy, not to mention the worst-case scenario. Although the others did not speak, they were more or less dissatisfied with the little female dragon. Even Brando, who brought back Allah's, could not help but have some private complaints. Brando was well aware of Feng Qi and the rest's feelings. He did not speak and only waved his hand, indicating for everyone to follow. In fact, there was a nameless anger in his heart, but as the leader of the team, he could not show it. But when everyone was ready to move, only the Prime Minister's daughter did not move. Brendel looked at her in confusion, wondering what was going on with this woman. Miss Delphine. His tone was inevitably a little unhappy. Now is not the time for you and Allah's to have a conflict. Although this matter is her fault, we have to follow up now. The Prime Minister's daughter looked at him and sighed. That's not the problem. What? Did anyone see Miss Allah's get off the ship? She asked. What do you mean? My lord, you were the first to get off the ship, followed by Huang Hua and Miss Magadol. Delphine calmly said. Then it was me, Ling and Lian, and finally Mr. Liu and Mr. Feng Qi. Did anyone see Miss Allah's get off the ship? Brando was stunned, and the others were more or less surprised. Princess Magadol opened her mouth and was about to ask something. But at this time, a crisp voice came from the side of the ship. Did anyone mention me? I just chased those annoying skeletons to the bottom of the ship. Miss Allah's? Princess Magadol exclaimed in surprise. What's wrong? Why are you all so weird? The little female dragon poked her small face out of the ship and looked at the others with a puzzled expression. After a moment, she retracted her body and climbed down the side of the ship. Once she landed on the ground, she looked at the others strangely. What were you all talking about? It seemed like you were talking bad about me? No, Magadol hurriedly explained. It's like this. What? After listening to Magadol's explanation, the little female dragon was so angry that she raised her eyebrows. You're saying that someone dares to impersonate Miss Chang? She appeared to be furious, but the others present seemed to be strangely quiet. If the little female dragon was here, then what did they see just now? Is it a shapeshifter? Magadol asked as she tried to find a suitable monster from her limited knowledge of the few monsters she knew. However, Brando shook his head. Shape-shifting monsters are native to Wonde. They don't exist outside of the elemental border, and there's no space for them to live. More importantly, how do they know about Miss Falofa? Ah! Allah suddenly let out a scream, her whole body trembling. The little female dragon seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and said in a trembling voice, that must be. Brando was actually certain of this. Apart from himself and the little female dragon, there was no one else who knew about the relationship between him and Falfa. And the remaining one could only be the other party involved in this matter. Brando! The little female dragon could not help but call out softly. Brendel gave her a comforting look. We'll find Miss Flofa. She might be nearby, but we have to be vigilant. It seems like someone already knows that we're coming here, and they've made preparations. But we just passed through the Channel of the Moons. When we entered the Channel of the Moons, did we see anyone in front of us? Lotus could not help but ask. There is more than one entrance to the Channel of the Moons. The sheephead disciples have been operating here for many years. It is impossible that they did not discover this channel. Maybe they are more familiar with this place than we are. Brando said as he glanced at Huang Hua and Feng Qi. He thought that the sheephead disciples must have been looking for a way to enter the realm of stagnation. It was just that they had always lacked two key elements. One was the dragon race, and the other was the descendants of the 9 phoenixes. Thinking of this, Brando could not help but feel lucky. If they had not met Allah's, they might have hit the 9th route of the Channel of the Moons. It seemed that the undead did not have comprehensive information, and it seemed that the same was true for the Twilight Dragon. All in all, this sudden incident made everyone more vigilant. In fact, if it were not for Delphine's calmness, they might have caught up and fallen into a trap. Brando faintly felt that this trap might be targeted at Allah's, because the other party's strength might not be enough to attack them. But if they had chased out and separated from the little female dragon on the ship, Allah's might not have been able to withstand the other party's subsequent attack. Every time everyone thought of this, they could not help but feel shocked and scared. Even the little female dragon herself could not help but feel grateful to Delphian. I didn't expect a human woman like you to be of some use. For this kind of gratitude, Delphian naturally smiled and politely declined. Even in this place, the mystery of the emerald still did not lose its effect. When the Prime Minister's daughter once again pointed out the right path for everyone realized that they were indeed still on the channel of the moons, and had not yet reached the realm of stagnation. But teacher, what is this place? This question still puzzled Huang Hua. The monotonous world of straight lines seemed to extend in an endless direction, protruding abruptly in the far distance, stacking with each other, forming repeated hills and mountains. This was an absolutely silent world, but it was not the kind of silence where one could hear a pin drop, but all the sounds seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding darkness. When they traveled on this strange land, there was not a single sound of footsteps, as if they were stepping on a soft sponge. Brando could only shake his head in response to this question. He felt that this place was somewhat like the Extreme Plains. The Extreme Plains was on the sacred mountain of the laws, reflecting the real world. It could be considered the other side of the world of Woned. Generally speaking, the Extreme Plains was actually on the elemental boundary. If one looked up from the elemental boundary, one could see the reflection of the vast and boundless world of Woned. In fact, he had been to this place before, and had a direct confrontation with the Twilight Dragon there. He watched as Miss Tada and the others used their lives to seal the Twilight Dragon on the other side of the world crystal wall. But here it was another Extreme Plains. What was it reflecting? Thinking of this, he looked up, but the sky was dark. There was no world of Woned, only a seemingly endless, gray, and lifeless world. He could not tell whether it was the dark clouds in the sky or something else. The unexpected danger made everyone silent, and Huang Hu quickly shut her mouth. She was not a talkative person, but the strange scene in front of her made her feel a little uneasy. Among the group, only Lotus had a conversational nature. She was whispering something to Lute, who was sitting on her sister's shoulder, as if they were discussing the origin of this place. Along the way, there was no lack of attacks from void predators. Just as Brando had described, these monsters were quite common in the chaotic world outside the elemental boundary. However, they were very weak. Occasionally there would be an elite void predator, but it was the weakest kind. Even Brando did not bother to take action. Huang Hua and Feng Qi could deal with them. But this situation did not make Brando feel relaxed. The void predators had a strong sense of territory. In fact, Leviathan was also a kind of void beast. Its body cruised in the sea of magic, and there were no other void beast lords in its range. Even Leviathan itself was the only one. Although it had many children, most of them were just its projections. It was almost the same for Imoku and Koleiji. In a vast area, there was often a powerful void beast lord ruling over it. Brando saw that this place was not small. Even if there were no ancient creatures like Imoku and Leviathan, there should at least be a void beast lord. But now, not to mention a void beast lord, even elite void predators were so rare. This was really abnormal. This strange situation continued until they began to move inland and began to approach the hilly area. Only then did it end. The group suddenly stopped because they saw some figures appear in the hills in front of them. The leader was a young girl. She had a head of long pitch-black hair that extended from her slender neck to her waist and reached her thighs. She wore a white robe that was very rare in Woned. This kind of wide straight robe with obvious fat sleeves was only worn by some desert people in the Silver Bay area. She had a pair of dark silver eyes that were as calm as water. It was as if she was not interested in anything in this world. She just stood at the entrance of the hills and looked at Brando's group. There were 7 or 8 men and women behind her. When Alaz saw the young girl, she could not help but freeze. Her petite body trembled violently, and her face was pale. In fact, it was rare to see such an expression on a dragon, even a young female dragon. And when Brando saw her, he could not help but call out her name. Miss Flora. Chapter 1397. Flora's appearance had changed a lot since the last time Brando saw her. First of all, her silver hair was dyed black by a strange power. Secondly, her clear eyes were now much darker, which made her exude a strange charm. But the look on the girl's face was as calm as ever. Even when she saw the little female dragon, her expression did not change at all. There were 7 or 8 companions behind her. If Brando guessed correctly, those should be the dragons controlled by the Twilight Dragon. The other party obviously came with ill intentions. When these dragons were combined, they were a powerful force. Although he had mastered the power of the sage, it was not easy to deal with several dragons. What's more, Brando understood that this was the place in Wone closest to the Sea of Chaos and Magic. It was the base camp of the Twilight Dragon. The other party must have more than that. Sure enough, after a while, everyone saw a shadow appear behind Flora and the others. The first thing Brando noticed was a giant beast. The monster's upper body was like a giant, with 2 heads and 4 arms. Its face was covered with snow-white bone plates. The bright red muscles on its arms were exposed above the bone aponeurosis. The end of each arm was forked, forming a black tentacle. The lower half of the monster's body was a lump of disgusting rotten flesh. Below its lower abdomen hung a deformed head, or something as disgusting as intestines. Its ribs and pelvis were exposed, gleaming with a cold light like the edge of a blade. The monster used the tentacles extended from the rotten meat to move. It was 20 or 30 feet tall. Brando recognized this terrible evil thing. It was a kind of predator, the devourer of divinity, one of the most famous lords of ether. Its power was enough to reach the peak of the supreme realm. Because it had a trace of divinity, it could even use part of the power of the sage. But the appearance of this thing at least made Brando relieved. Presumably, this was the strongest power that the sheephead believers had here. It was also the ruler of all the predators of ether. Fortunately, there was no demigod opponent here. It should be noted that the top predators in the void, such as the Eternal Trauma and the Butcher of Truth, were not inferior to the real gods. However, most of those terrifying names existed in the ancient times, and they had long been annihilated in the earliest wars. A devourer of divinity was already considered one of the top combat forces in this era. He knew this monster from the end of the game in his previous life, in the version where Ekis perished. An adult devourer of divinity was the boss of a large dungeon at that time. He still remembered that the last boss of that dungeon was Ekis' 6th daughter, Tedessa. Even so, the combination of 8 to 9 dragons and a devourer of divinity still made one feel heavy and oppressed, not to mention the ordinary void predators and elite void predators that surged forth like a tide under the command of the Ether Lord. These monsters of the chaos had been hiding in the hills, and now they finally revealed their ferocious faces. They used illusions to hide their figures. Huang He whispered, "Teacher, be careful, there may be an ambush nearby." Brando shook his head. Illusions were not omnipotent. Since the other party dared to expose themselves, it would definitely arouse the vigilance of his side. They should not be stupid enough to use this trick again and again. But even so, he still used his darkness perception to scan his surroundings. What surprised him was that his darkness perception seemed to be exceptionally powerful in this place. Perhaps the darkness magic that pervaded this plane enhanced his senses. He really didn't sense the presence of any ambushers in other directions. "Brendel, please give me the hibiscus spell," the little female dragon said with some urgency. No. Brando's opinion was the opposite of hers. He frowned as he stared at the army of monsters coming in their direction and ordered sternly, "Leave Flora and the other dragons to me. You deal with the devourer of divinity. Allah's Huang Hua Fang Qi, Mr. Liu, you protect the others, especially Miss Delphian. Without her, we will not be able to leave this place." Huang Hua and the others nodded seriously. Only Fang Qi seemed a little slack, but Brando knew that his nonchalance was just an act. This young man from the Phantom Chariot was arrogant but smart. He had always gone all out in battle. If you thought that he would be careless and underestimate the enemy, you would probably be fooled. Ling and Lian automatically stood in the middle of the crowd. The half-elf sisters knew that they could only be regarded as a burden in this team. However, they had always been more mature and well-behaved than ordinary little girls. They didn't do anything out of the ordinary out of fear. Magadol stood with the 2 little ladies wanting to comfort them, but in fact, she was much more nervous than Ling and Lotus. She even took out the Book of Gaia. For the time being, she wasn't very proficient in using this book. She wasn't clear about her strength and potential. In fact, she still didn't understand why the war goddesses wanted her to come to this place. But she had always been gentle and resigned. Besides, Brando had saved her life, and she did not object out of gratitude. In Magadal's opinion, the war goddesses who taught her a lot of new knowledge were also very respectful of Brando, and even considered themselves as his subordinates. Their opinion should at least represent part of Brando's will. Although on this point, the nun princess had completely misunderstood. In fact, Brando did not know why Andrea and the others would make such a suggestion. After hearing Brando's suggestion, Alaz pouted slightly. But this little female dragon also understood that she was not suitable to face Flora, or else it would only be a repeat of the tragedy in the Toxic Swamp. She did not care what Flora did to her, and was even willing to die in the hands of her partner. But she also understood that her decision was related to the survival of the whole team, and Brando alone could not fight against all of them. "Are you okay, stinky human?" Alaz asked with some concern. "There are so many of them, it is already very difficult for me to deal with 2 of them." Brando nodded. Whether he could hold on or not, it would depend on the strength of the Sage Domain. Based on his experience in the game in his previous life, even in the first stage of the Perfect Body stage, players would not be able to fight against a few adult dragons. But the player's Perfect Body stage was not complete, and his Sage Domain was the real Sage Domain. It was an experience that none of the players in his previous life had experienced. Although he had never experienced this stage, he could faintly feel that in some ways, the power he had now was not inferior to his heyday in his previous life. Of course, the specifics still needed to be verified by actual combat. As a warrior, he believed in the theory of actual combat. Without experiencing the real test of life and death, all experience and theory were just for show. Not to mention he still had a trump card. After several battles, Huanghua was no longer the same as before. In fact, Brando found that the little princess of the Jade Phoenix bloodlines' amazing combat intuition came from her keen sense of danger. This sense of smell was outstanding when she put down the sword in her hand. After the battle with the sheep-head disciples in the Toxic Swamp, he deliberately guided the little princess to not use a sword to fight. The effect was obvious, and it could be said that she improved a lot. She often fought with Alaz, and at first she was completely suppressed, but it did not take long for her to come back. Even the little female dragon said that Huanghua was a rare genius. He also gave the little girl a pair of boxing gloves, which was given to him by the Termosian of the Ice Sea clan. It was one of the few treasured weapons in the Termosian's collection. This thing was not of much use to him, because he was not good at hand-to-hand combat, but this boxing glove was very strange. It was a typical weapon in the style of the Nine Phoenix called the Nine Phoenix gloves. It was a pair of satin boxing gloves, with deerskin and jade finger brass knuckles at the joints of the gloves. After enchantment, it was especially hard. This glove was a weapon that had reached the highest quality of legendary equipment. Of course, this was nothing in the collection of the Termosi people. What was interesting was that there were 7 jade pendants on this glove. Every time a jade pendant was activated, it would gain a kind of power. Although this power could only be activated once a day, it was very powerful. This made this glove, which was not considered the best overall, have the potential to be called a subdivine weapon. Huanghua loved this boxing glove. Of course, on the one hand, this represented the recognition of her teacher, but more of the power of the 7 jade pendants. According to Huanghua, the power of the 7 jade pendants was not groundless. The concept they represented was a continuation of the philosophy of the Nine Phoenix, which was close to the power of the Tao. It was especially compatible with the idea of the Nine Phoenix's unity of heaven and man. Of course, more importantly, under the buff of this boxing glove, Huanghua's strength could barely reach the level of Alaz. This was something that the sheep-head disciple and Akenta did not know, and Fuluafa should not be very clear about this. On the other hand, Feng Qi and Mr. Lu were not weak either. In fact, after taking back the sacred jade sword, Feng Qi was even stronger. In addition, they still had a hidden combat power, and that was Princess Magadal. Although Brando did not know how much power the nun princess had mastered, according to Andrea's description, as long as she could exert 30% of the power of the Book of Gaia, Feng Qi and Huanghua together should not be her opponent. With these trump cards, Brando could fight with peace of mind, but he was not in a hurry to make a move. He knew that the next battle had nothing to do with him. He only needed to pay attention to Fuluafa and the dragons behind her. Chapter 1398. From the edge of the hills to where they were, there was a distance of more than 10 miles. But for existences of this level, this battlefield could only be considered long and narrow. It took less than a minute for the ether predators to reach them. In the face of these strange-looking creatures, Fang Qi snorted coldly and took the lead in fighting. The stability and accuracy of the phantom chariot swordsmanship was vividly reflected in the jade dragon's sacred sword in his hand. The moment he charged into the battle formation, more than a dozen ether predators exploded into a cloud of blood. However, Fang Qi did not feel any better. He soon realized that these monsters were not only numerous, but their individual strength was also not to be underestimated. They were by no means comparable to the miscellaneous soldiers he had seen outside. Moreover, the elusive elites hidden among the cannon fodder were even more of a potential threat. He had only made his first move, and he had almost fallen into the enemy's trap. A monster covered in bone plates, which looked like a smaller version of the Devourer of Divinity, hid in a large group of octopus monsters, and launched a sneak attack on him. Fang Qi did not recognize it as the famous Devourer of Divinity among the elite predators. But if he had not reacted quickly enough, the monster's claws would have almost swept across his neck. This extremely dangerous encounter made him break out in a cold sweat. At the same time, he completely calmed down. He subconsciously moved in the direction of Huang Hua and Mr. Liu, not daring to rashly advance. Huang Hua and Mr. Liu also found it difficult to deal with. The little princess of the Jade Phoenix lineage had put on the boxing gloves that Brando had given her at the beginning, and had activated the return of wind and the guard of 1 or 2 jade rings. As she moved, all the ether predators that attacked her were swept aside by a stream of air. Huang Hua even seized the opportunity to capture the neck of a devourer of shadow that had pounced on Mr. Liu. Golden red flames spread out from her fingertips, and in the blink of an eye, the monster was reduced to ashes amidst its screams. While these low-level predators of the realm of ether were pouring in like a tide, the huge devourer of divinity had finally arrived. Although its face, which was made of snow-white bone plates, did not have any facial features, it could still raise its head and let out a shrill shriek that made everyone's teeth ache. Everyone watched as the monster smashed a path through the tide of void reavers. With a swing of its 4 long arms, the monsters in front of it were flung into the air. Some were even sliced in half by its sharp claws. Corrosive blood splattered all over the sky. This terrifying ether lord showed no mercy to its own subjects. Its ferocious nature caused everyone to tremble in fear. Moreover, those powerful elites were so weak that they could not even withstand a single blow from the monster's claws. One could only imagine how powerful it was. Alaz knew that this thing could not be allowed to get close to Delphian and the others, or else Phoenix Hua and the others would not be able to hold the line. As soon as it appeared, the little female dragon let out a low roar from her throat and suddenly transformed into her original form. She spread her golden dragon wings that covered the sky and swung her claws at the devourer of divinity. The sudden appearance of a dragon on the battlefield caused chaos among the void beasts. The Lord of Ether's divinity, devourer of divinity, seemed to have sensed that its authority was being challenged. It roared again and went straight for Alaz. It swung one of its arms at Alaz. The dragon's claws and the tentacle-like claws collided in midair, making a dull sound like leather being struck. The golden dragon that Alaz transformed into roared, and left a long bloody mark on the tentacle with her claws. She then turned around and swung her dragon tail, hitting the monster's chest and abdomen heavily, sending it flying and crushing a large group of void predators. The little female dragon gained the upper hand as soon as she made her move, and everyone's spirits were lifted. But Brendel already knew that this devourer of divinity would not be a match for an adult gold dragon. But Alaz would not be able to win completely in a short time. The ether predators were extremely tenacious. In fact, they were similar to their counterparts born in the chaos, the demons. Most of the methods to deal with them were exile or expulsion. To kill them completely, it would take a lot more effort. Not to mention that outside the elemental frontier, in this place that was called their home ground, the ether beasts could obtain an endless supply of power. Even if they were killed in a short period of time, they could be resurrected after a period of hibernation. However, this was not something that Brando had to consider. If no one interfered, Alaz's final victory was certain. As for whether this devourer of divinity would be resurrected or not, it would be at least a few centuries later. Perhaps in that era, the Twilight Dragon had long since ceased to exist, Or perhaps Vaunt had become a part of history that had been covered in dust forever. But he knew that Florfa and the dragons behind her would not just stand by and watch their subordinates fail. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the hills from afar. Sure enough, the situation there had changed. To be exact, Florfa and her several companions moved together. The dragons split into two groups. One group, led by Florfa, rushed straight towards Brando. On the other hand, the three giant dragons were the main route, and they were detouring towards Alaz on the side. Although the distance between the two was tens of thousands of meters, for a dragon of the level of existence, it was just a matter of flapping their wings. Brando saw that 4 or 5 dragons had transformed into their original forms, and knew that the other party was going to attack with all their might. But how could he let the other party's wishful thinking work? Brando looked in that direction. The holy sword Odorfice was still in his hand, but he did not do anything. Suddenly, the entire battlefield quieted down. To be exact, the 9 dragons that were scattered in different directions suddenly found that they were all dragged into a completely different time and space. This was a strange time and space. It was dark and quiet, as if it was the center of the universe. As they looked up, the deep space was filled with the light of stars. That was the light of billions of stars and light, countless galaxies and nebulae intertwined together, exuding an eternal brilliance. This light was like poetry in clouds. It passed through every corner of this world, recording the history between millions of stars. This was the dimension of time and space. It was both vast and subtle. It was not unchanging. It could bend at every node, thus forming a perfect enclosed body. It would imprison and banish all creatures trapped in it for eternity. Of course, the dragons understood that this was the power of the Supreme Realm. To be exact, this was a perfect land of the Supreme Realm. In fact, most of them were the best at using the power of the Supreme Realm. Very few dragons had not touched the level of the Supreme Realm. Generally speaking, dragons could reach this level as long as they reached adulthood. Among them, there were a few, such as geniuses like Flora, who could touch a part of the power of the Sage Realm. Or, if they went one step further, like a legendary champion like Owenlos, they could even embark on the real path, the path of demigod. But at this moment, there was a flash of fear in Flora's eyes. Because of her, they suddenly realized that they had been fooled. That cunning demon did not reveal the whole truth to them. They suddenly realized that they were facing the real power. The dragons called the power above the Sage Realm the real power in this world, because it came from the divine fire, and also from the world itself. Such power was something that even they did not understand. In other words, what they had to face was a true sage. That was the young human in front of them. He was so unbelievably young. Even according to human values, he was just a young man who had just passed his teenage years. Flora and the other dragons seemed to have heard Akentu's treacherous laughter. She frowned. It seemed that it was too late to regret now. And contrary to the complicated thoughts of these dragons, Brando felt an extreme surprise at this moment. It was not because the power of the Sage Realm did not reach his level, but because it was too much. The absolute control over the two elements of space and time made him feel as if he was the only god at the birth of the universe. It was as if he could destroy the universe with a flip of his hand, and the 9 worms trapped in this space were just a bunch of insects. Of course, he knew that this was just an illusion. It was a sense of self-inflation that ordinary people felt when they mastered power beyond their imagination. The power of the Sage Realm was strong, but it was not strong enough to ignore 7 Supreme-class champions and Flora, who was half a step into the Sage Realm. The dragons reacted quickly. As the Golden Race, they were all outstanding warriors who had a deep understanding of power. They could even be said to be tacticians. Without a moment of hesitation, they all rushed towards the center of the universe, which was Brando. The only master of an extreme plane was the person who controlled it, and defeating its master was the only way to destroy it. Furthermore, fully unleashing a Lemeter's full power consumed an enormous amount of energy, which was why a partial extreme plane had become an important symbol for peak Lemeters. The center of the Lemeter domain was the strongest part of the planes, but it was also the weakest part. After all, if you couldn't defeat its master in one strike, then it would be an unimaginably powerful existence. No matter how you struggled, you would only die. So many Supreme-class champions liked to fight like this in a battle where there was a great disparity in power. For example, Williams did the same when he fought against Brando. But if you couldn't stop the enemy from crushing your kingdom in a single stroke, then all your power would be a laughable bubble, because you had already shown your strongest side but still failed shamefully. At such a time, all your power of laws would instead amplify your weakness and become your Achilles heel. Chapter 1399. Obviously, this negative example was still vividly displayed by the unlucky Williams. Of course, it was just that Brando used a more opportunistic method at that time. This was a win-or-die move. Brando knew very well that it was impossible for him to block the combined attack of 8 Lemeters and 1 Fu Luofa. However, he had no choice but to use this method. He had to keep these dragons in his realm and kingdom, otherwise Alaz and the others would not be able to hold on. As the captain of this temporary team, he had to shoulder this responsibility. She and her dragons could only hope that this attack would work. However, she did not see any fear or hesitation on the young man's face. He seemed to be very confident, which made them look weak and powerless. Could it be that this ridiculously young human could actually withstand their combined attack? The combined attack of 8 Lemeters and 1/2 Saint? Fu Luofa wasn't confident either, but at that moment no one could retreat. It was the same for her and the other 8 dragons. As a race that lived for battle, the dragons would never hesitate under any circumstances, including the threat of death. But at this moment she saw the young human make a move. He laid down 7 spatial faults along their path. She had long known that this was an extreme plane that was related to the elements of time and space, but she did not expect the young man to have such control. This was the true power of the sage. The last bit of hope in her heart disappeared at this moment. The 8 dragons collided with the spatial faults one after another. Every time they collided with a fault, the young man's face turned paler. After all, this kind of collision of power was targeted at the user of the power. There was absolutely no way anyone could take advantage of it. But even so, the dragons fell behind one by one, and Brando soon came face to face with her. This was what Brando wanted to achieve in advance: to catch bandits first, catch the ringleader. However, she couldn't complain about the current situation. This young man had taken on one of her companion's attacks. Although the joint attack was separated, the residual force was still stacked together. She had to give it her all in this last punch. Otherwise, what awaited them would definitely not be the result she wanted. At the last moment, the cunning face of the demon appeared in front of her eyes. She gritted her teeth. If they were lucky enough to escape, then she would definitely teach that purgatory lord a lesson. But the question was, could they really escape? Fu Luofa suddenly thought that Akentu, the lord of the purgatory, wasn't known for his bravery and recklessness. Instead, he was known for his schemes and cunning. Perhaps it had planned all of this from the beginning, and would not leave them with this opportunity. In this state of anxiety and uneasiness, she finally came face to face with Brendel. At this moment, she threw away all thoughts in her mind and attacked the youth like a real dragon. It was a strike filled with anger. When Brando saw Fu Luofa attacking him, he sighed inwardly. For some reason, he recalled the time in Valhalla when this dragon girl had angrily slapped him in the face. That was probably something she would do when her emotions were greatly affected. Because in her usual expression, it was very difficult to find anger, uneasiness, or joy. How could one imagine such a quiet and virtuous lady erupting with such anger? It was all that damn Allah's fault. He was just a scapegoat in this whole incident. Fortunately, no one in the territory knew about this. He carefully kept this small rumor that might ruin the reputation of the Count of Abes. Then he thought of his first encounter with Alaz and Fu Luofa. At that time he was still an insignificant character. Even in the letter sent from Fortress Reden to the royal capital, he was only a marginal character in the war. Although he saved many people in Bucci and Fortress Reden, in the War of the Black Rose, that was only the tip of the iceberg. At that time he had to put in a lot of effort to even face Ebden of that era. A gargoyle could almost take his life, let alone a dragon. That was a level of power that he and Freya could only look up to at that time. But now, he could face this kind of power head-on. Brando felt as if there was an endless amount of power in his body. The power of the 8 dragons that he split apart was transferred to his body one by one. It did not affect him much at all. He gently raised his hand and pressed on Fu Luofa's shoulder. Under the shocked gaze of this dragon girl, He pushed her back. Fuluafa was like a meteor. No matter where she came from, she flew back at a speed that was several times faster than before. With a boom, she crashed into a planet in the distance. The uneven asteroid was smashed into pieces, and the body of the cracked planet dissipated in the void, turning into dust and drifting in the pitch-black space. The combined attack of the 8 dragons was neutralized by Brando just like that. On the battlefield, the battle had just reached its climax. Alaz and the Devourer of Divinity were locked in a fierce battle. The golden dragon and the disgusting monster were like 2 bulldozers plowing through the battlefield. Of course, most of the victims were the ordinary ether predators. In fact, the little female dragon deliberately lured the ether lord towards the direction where the monsters were most concentrated. The latter did not realize that it was becoming one of the biggest enemies of its subjects. But even so, Alaz was still injured in many places. Of course, the Devourer of Divinity's injuries were deeper and more serious. But in comparison, the Ether Lord's vitality was obviously much stronger than the dragon's. So the little female dragon could not do anything to this disgusting monster. But the situation on the battlefield was really not in Brando's favor, because the number of enemies was just too great. Even with Alaz's help, it was still not enough from the height of the battlefield. Feng Qi and Mr. Lu's stamina began to weaken. Huang Hua was also panting. Even the little fairy lute joined the battle. But it was still useless. The battlefield began to slowly move towards the stranded ship. The little female dragon could not help but feel a little anxious. She understood that even the balance in front of her was in fact temporary. Brando alone could not stop Fuluafa and the rest. She knew that Brando had entered the Sage Domain. But how long could the Sage Domain last in front of 9 dragons? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? What about after that? Once Fuluafa and the rest escaped, the situation on the battlefield would be completely reversed. They had to secure victory before that happened. Thinking of this, Alaz could not help but burst out with a furious scream. A hidden force erupted from nowhere and slapped the Devourer of Divinity to the ground. Then she flapped her wings and flew up, wanting to cast a powerful string magic to clear the battlefield in one fell swoop. The magic of the dragon race was famous. String magic was not as changeable as the elemental magic of the elementalists, nor was it as close to the truth of the world as the Buga mage's spells. But its power was pure destruction. The flame strike of the golden dragon could easily destroy a city. But the Devourer of Divinity was not a pure idiot. When Alaz flapped her wings and wanted to fly into the sky, a tentacle flew out from the group of monsters and wrapped around her ankle. Then she was thrown down hard like a comet crashing into the ground. Alaz screamed and could not help but feel dizzy for a moment. On the other side of the battlefield, Huang Hua and the rest witnessed the scene of the little female dragon being injured with their own eyes. Their faces could not help but darken. Lotus was particularly anxious. The half-elf girl could not help but anxiously said to the Prime Minister's daughter, "Miss Delphian, you have the best idea here. Please think of something quickly." Delphian reached out and patted her head. "This is a matter for the warriors. We can only trust them. But let me try." At this moment, a slightly unconfident voice rang out. The Prime Minister's daughter turned around and saw Princess Magadol looking at her with an uneasy expression. "Is there a problem?" Delphian knew very well that the Prime Minister's daughter was not familiar with the Book of Gaia in her hands. Although she had used that power many times in the Land of Everlasting Death and mostly succeeded, it was the first time she used it on the battlefield. First of all, she had to deal with the problem of not hurting her own people. Secondly, interference on the battlefield was also a problem. Furthermore, her power was not stable. The power she used from the Book of Gaia seemed to be full of randomness. "I know that Mr. Brando has always suspected that the demon is behind this," Magadol said softly, "but it has not appeared yet. I am afraid that it is waiting for us to deal a fatal blow when we are too busy to fend for ourselves." "You have a point." Delphian nodded. She looked at the chaotic battlefield and saw that the frail princess did not seem to be too nervous. "Do you want to open your book now?" "Yes." Magadol took a deep breath. She silently took a step forward and held her hands in the air. The title page of the Book of Gaia emitted a fluorescent light. On the black metal cover, there was an image of mountains and earth carved with complicated patterns. When the light from the title page shone on it, the mountains became three-dimensional. Then the title page of the book opened automatically. The nun princess's face changed into a solemn expression. Revelation, page 37, chapter 4, section 7. Chapter 1400. The book of Gaia flew to Magadol's chest, and the pages flipped. She slowly raised her head, and her eyes reflected the entire battlefield. Two halos rose from her left and right, as if an invisible force was lifting her long hair. A mechanical voice rang across the battlefield. Please select your target. Four light blue virtual screens appeared in front of the nun princess at the same time, invisible to others. The first screen filtered out all the dust and smoke on the battlefield, as well as the sounds of killing and blood. The second screen would highlight all the moving units, distinguish between friend and foe, and calculate their movement trajectories. The third screen listed the terrain of the entire battlefield from left to right, distance and elevation. When the last screen was superimposed on the last screen, the logo of Gaia appeared on the screen. After rotating 180 degrees counterclockwise, the black and white dragon emblems representing Martha and the Twilight Dragon separated, and a huge gray shadow shrouded Magadol's eyes. Although this was not the first time she had used the Book of Gaia, every time she used its power, Magadol could not help but be amazed. Please select your target, Titan GX013. The mechanical voice repeated again. I am Magadol. The nun princess stubbornly repeated. As you wish, Your Highness Magadol. The mechanical voice repeated. Magadol's gaze froze in the middle of the battlefield. She briskly reported 3 readings. This seemingly simple task was the result of Andrea and the others' efforts over the past month. Just to let Princess Magadol identify the coordinates, the goddesses of war had to correct her misconceptions of the world. Of course, at this moment, Magadol still stubbornly believed that it was the path of the Golden Flames and the other 3 sages who started this era. After the War of the Holy Saints, the stars in the sky were rewritten, and the gods no longer cared about this world. The mortals carefully followed the path of their ancestors, and even if some of them fell, most of them still held on to the right beliefs. But as if she had inherited some memories from her bloodline, she finally accepted everything she had seen and heard after the Battle of Fenhotos, including the strange remarks that Andrea had told her. This is what you call the law, Andrea once said to her when she talked about her past and the power that corresponded to the Book of Gaia. It does represent part of the truth of this world, but it is more of a man-made law. At that time, Magadol had a look of confusion. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she had heard something unreasonable. But that is the law set by the gods. Wand was born under the law set by Lord Martha. No matter who made the rules, it is only one of the rules. It may not be true, or the people of the gods wouldn't have such a huge disagreement. When Andrea said those words, she hesitated. We gain power from it, and in turn we maintain our order, but the cost of maintaining it is too high, and we cannot bear with it. In the end, we could not bear it. So we cannot bear it, we have to restart. What is a mortal? When she mentioned this word, Magadol noticed the obvious sarcasm in the girl's voice. Haha, mortal is hope. Some people are tired of this game, but more people are not willing to change. You will not understand the contradiction between us. The gods are not noble, but of course we have no choice. Andrea let out a long sigh. Compared to the past, I prefer the present. Although countless people have sacrificed themselves, including myself and the commander, every one of us could be sacrificed at any moment. At least there is still hope. Without those endless excuses and wrangling, the lives and values of the warriors will be reflected on the battlefield. Normally Magadol would not understand Andrea's self-mocking words, but she could at least hear one thing. Whether it was Andrea, the undead queen of Madara, or Mr. Brando, or even the people she hated, such as the Empress of Cruz, everyone was fighting for that unknown glimmer of hope. But according to Andrea's words, it was just a struggle. Magadol could not understand whether the goal was despicable, noble, or worthless. But she only needed to understand that at this moment, everyone's fate was linked to the survival of this world. Even she could not stay out of it. And this was the reason why she decided to listen to Andrea's orders and join the adventurer team. During that time, the only thing that Magadol was puzzled about was that whenever Andrea mentioned Brando, she would always be filled with a different kind of emotion towards this commander. She understood that it was not pure love between a man and a woman, but a kind of hope for the future that was rarely seen in the goddess of war. What kind of secret does Mr. Brando have? Magadol would occasionally think about it, but she never got the answer to this question. In her opinion, this young knight who claimed to be from the Karsuk Highlands was a standard Erewhon noble, but sometimes he was a little rebellious. But what really impressed her was the noble spirit that he had inherited from the ancient times. Sometimes she could not help but compare Brando to the noble, who died in the Battle of Ampere Seal. Although she did not want to admit it, even before that noble showed his ferocious face to her, he could not compare to this count. Target confirmed. In the end, Magadol silently abandoned all unnecessary emotions and said these few words. When she said these words, she felt an inexplicable feeling fade away from her, like a huge sense of loss. She had never felt so unfamiliar with herself before. She could not help but wonder, am I the princess of Antiburo, the devout believer who follows the rules and never dares to challenge tradition and authority? Or am I the more real self in front of me, a titan from an ancient civilization? The powerful energy from the heart of the dragon surged under the princess's chest, and the sound of her steady pulse seemed to be silently answering this question. Griffine! Magadol could not help but mutter to herself, where should I go from here? Why has the world become like this? But the mechanical voice did not care about her complicated emotions. It simply replied, the attack range has been confirmed. Then it repeated with an even more rigid voice, transferring authority to the original core network, attacking and charging. Countdown for 3, 2, 1. This additional command pulled the nun princess out of her complicated thoughts. When she was practicing with Andrea and the others, she had never encountered such a situation. Wait, why is there a transfer of authority? Magadol asked anxiously. She was not familiar with the Book of Gaia and her own powers, and this sudden change of events made her panic. But the worst-case scenario did not happen, and the mechanical voice did not answer her question. In the dark sky, the cloud-like thing that Brando saw earlier suddenly split in the middle, and then 3 spots of light lit up from the south to the north. Although from the ground, the 3 spots of light that looked like stars were very close to each other. But in fact, the distance between them was enough to cover a range of tens or even hundreds of miles. Then a faint ray of light fell from the sky. This strange scene was so eye-catching in the dark battlefield that it even attracted the attention of Huang Hua and Fang Qi. As for a place further away from the battlefield, there was also an even deeper gaze looking at this place. When the ray of light fell to the ground, suddenly, there was a dull sound from the ground, and under Magadol's calm gaze that had abandoned all emotions, the battlefield was split into 3 sections. That wasn't an exaggeration. Instead, the plains in front of the hills had completely broken apart. Amidst a series of creaking noises, 3 huge subsidence zones were formed one after another. Then she uttered the name of this spell word by word. The highest verdict. Alaz was fighting with the devourer of divinity. When she tore off the monster's snow-white face with her claw, and exposed the bloody flesh behind, the monster let out a terrifying scream and tried to retaliate with its 4 arms. But under the little female dragon's shocked gaze, its claws suddenly sank and missed one of her claws, because the 2 of them were suddenly separated by a sudden force. It was a clear boundary between realms, leaving the little female dragon and the horrifying monster on the left and right respectively. The former was fortunate enough to survive, while the latter lost all its footing. Its massive body began to tilt backward, and fell into a cloud of dust. The non-physical ground slowly sank in the sharp noise like a capsized ark. The grid that formed the ground suddenly became sharp and twisted on the plains, and slowly bent downwards. And with it, thousands of void monsters sank. Chapter 1401. Everyone, including Huang Hua, Fang Qi, Mr. Liu, and the 2 half-elf sisters, were strangely isolated on the other side of the sinking. In front of them was a scene of disaster. The entire plain had completely disappeared. The nun princess' long hair fluttered as her entire body left the ground and floated in the air. She was watching everything with an inhuman coldness as thousands of lives vanished. The power of the spell was not just tearing the earth apart, but affecting everything in the region. Thousands of void monsters fell to the ground in an instant, with thousands of times the gravity exerted on their bodies, most of them exploding into a pile of flesh and blood in an instant. The devourer of divinity screamed as it fell. At the last moment, it tried to curl up its tentacles to entangle the little female dragon's hind claws, but Alaz, who had been tricked once, would not let it do as it wished. With a gentle step back, the tentacles swept over the edge of the cliff like a steel whip, and with a sharp whistling sound, the tentacles returned without any success. The figure of the devourer of divinity fell into the abyss until it disappeared. Everything about it was swallowed up by the darkness. Apart from a mournful scream, everything else was gone from this moment on. Most of the people present had seen Andrea training Magadol to use the power of the Book of Gaia in the land of eternal death. But none of them were as shocking as this. In fact, even the nun princess was shocked. She could clearly feel that the power of the Book of Gaia, or rather her own power, had been strengthened. She felt that this place, not just the plane, had a faint feeling of tolerance for her power. It was not the faint rejection she felt when she used the Book of Gaia in Wound. How could this be? Magadol was stunned. But at this moment, the dull mechanical voice suddenly rang out without warning. Attack detected, power level. All the light screens floating in front of her turned into a blinding red, and all kinds of notifications were giving her ear-piercing alarms. She saw 2 halos on her left and right suddenly stand up and surround her. She clearly saw the eye-catching prompt closest to her, which indicated the power level of OZ. But behind it was a long string of zeros that she could not even count. The voice warned her sharply. Do you want to activate the defense mechanism? What defense mechanism? Magadol had never heard of such a thing from Andrea before. She subconsciously thought that it was one of the abilities of the Book of Gaia, but she did not have time to think too much about it as an unprecedented sense of danger suddenly enveloped her. That feeling was like being stared at by the Grim Reaper. That cold gaze was without any pity. His heart seemed to freeze in that instant. His eardrums buzzed, his blood flowed in reverse, and his limbs turned cold. She did not know where her intuition came from, but she sensed that a terrifying force was sweeping towards her. Below the battlefield, Alaz Huanghua, and the others were unaware of it. She quickly screamed. Agreed. A white light descended from the sky. It was a diamond-shaped metallic object. If Brando were to see it again, he would definitely be surprised to recognize that it was similar to the array of constructs he had seen outside of the elemental boundary. But at this time, the strange diamond-shaped metallic object flew around Magadol, and suddenly formed a semicircular light shield with it as the center. An invisible force pierced through the air and hit the light shield heavily, but the light shield only rippled for a moment before quickly stabilizing. What is this? Magadol looked at the diamond-shaped object that suddenly appeared beside her and asked in surprise. She could tell at a glance that this was definitely not something summoned by the Book of Gaia. She did not feel the slightest bit of power from the Book of Gaia before this. Creator's Core number 7 from the 3rd area of the Old Capital has taken over authority. The dull and mechanical voice replied. Miss Magadol, what's going on up there? At this time, the people below finally noticed the situation above, and the little female dragon was the first to ask. But Magadol did not answer her question because she was stunned. Ah, damn it. Akenta could not help but curse fiercely. Its voice echoed in the void repeatedly like rolling thunder. But this voice could not be heard outside, so no one knew the anger in the Lord of Purgatory's heart at this moment. But it was also somewhat relieved. Fortunately, I was cautious enough and I still have those dragon fools to make use of. Otherwise, I would have suffered a great loss this time. Its gaze could penetrate the barrier between the planes and landed on the shattered battlefield. It saw the terrifying power that Magadol displayed with its own eyes, and even its own body felt a chill run down its spine. A titan, Akenta muttered to itself. There is actually a surviving titan. Those cunning fellows did not give up at all. It looked in that direction with lingering fear, and its blood-red eyes revealed a look of pity. It was a pity that it had been sealed here for nearly 10,000 years, and now it could not actively exert too much influence on the outside world. Otherwise, it would not have wasted this second clone. What a pity, but it was all worth it, said. Magadol obviously did not expect that in that moment of confrontation, she had inadvertently killed a clone of the Lord of Purgatory. Of course, that was not her credit. In fact, Akenta had obviously noticed this point. It obviously had realized that although the other party looked like the legendary Lost 13th Titan, and was also the most perfect creation of the Titan project, It seemed that for some unknown reason, the other party was not fully awakened. This discovery made it overjoyed. Of course, it knew what the metal object around Magadol was. It was the Creator's core, one of the strongest weapons created by Gaia. They were originally a part of the nuclear system, but they were given to Mother Earth Gaia by Marcia. After that, these things were forged into powerful weapons and allocated to the 12 strongest children of Gaia. The Creator's core of the 13th Titan was not forged in the Silver Plains, and it was only a half-finished product. At least 10% of the reason they stayed here was to create that thing. But that woman hid it so well that it still had no clue. As for the thing around Magadol, Akenta recognized that it should be a relic of a Titan. But even so, it was not something that it dared to provoke. Fortunately, the other party did not seem to know how to use it. She only knew how to use a quarter of the Pale Poem's replica, and that was not worth mentioning in Akenta's eyes. That was enough. It did not want to risk being chased by a ridiculously powerful young man and a Titan to carry out the next step of the plan. Even at this time, the arrogant and easily manipulated dragons were holding back the young man. But since that was the case, then its next move was much more promising. Akenta's eyes greedily swept across the two people in Brando's group. In contrast, the void predators that were annihilated on the battlefield, including the Devourer of Divinity, seemed to have never been in its eyes. Those were just cannon fodder. At least that was what Akenta thought. Anyway, demons and void lords had never peed in the same pot. At least until now, everything is still going according to plan. The Lord of Purgatory's eyes shone brightly as he let out a sigh of relief. Next, it's time for my most loyal and capable servants to make their appearance. The fog on the battlefield began to spread. At this time, Magadol had already descended from the sky and explained what happened to the others. But no one, including Alaz, recognized what the diamond-shaped object floating beside the nun princess was. But the little female dragon was after all a dragon, and she already knew the true identity of the nun princess, so she could more or less guess that it was one of the special equipment of the Titans, just like the Book of Gaia in her hands. Compared to this, the one who attacked you just now is more suspicious. The little female dragon frowned and asked, I suspect that it's that damned goat. What about you, Magadol? Do you feel anything? Princess Magadol shook her head. In fact, blocking the attack had nothing to do with her. It was all the credit of this diamond-shaped object. She had also tested this object before she landed, and it did not listen to her commands at all, and only floated beside her, although she had a faint feeling that this object would take the initiative to protect her. The two of them could not discuss anything, and Huang Hua, who was the closest to them, came out of the fog first. Madame Magadol, Miss Alaz, this fog is strange. Huang Hua saw the two of them and took the initiative to speak with a slightly serious tone. What's strange? Cough cough. The little female dragon coughed twice as she was choked by the dust in the air, and asked unhappily. This is Magadol's doing. It's a little too loud, but those monsters have all been buried underground. That's not right. The little princess of the Jade Phoenix bloodline shook her head. There's no dust on the ground at all. How could such a large amount of dust be raised? Chapter 1402. That's not right. The Jade Phoenix princess shook her head. There's no dust on the ground here. How could there be such a large amount of dust? Alaz was stunned, and Magadol's expression changed slightly. She squatted down and rubbed the ground with her hand, and then her thin eyebrows furrowed. Oh no, there's something wrong here. It must be that cunning goat Akentu. Alaz was already jumping up and down. Dragons and demons were mortal enemies. Not to mention that she had suffered a lot at the hands of Akentu and Takik. She was extremely prejudiced against the Lord of Purgatory. He must be nearby, and he attacked Magadol earlier. Huang Hua did not answer, and just threw the thing in her hand to the ground. And this. Alaz and Magadol took a closer look, and found that Huang Hua was holding the corpse of a strange creature. She threw the creature on the ground, and a pair of red wings appeared on the back of the skinny monster. This is a lesser demon. It really is Akentu. The little female dragon's expression changed. Where are the others, and where is Delphian? Hundreds of millions of stars gathered together, hanging in the dark space, but a trace of the aura of death was reflected. Nearby, almost all the planets were shattered, and the light of the stars was dim. Occasionally, there would be broken asteroids floating in front of Brando, and the aura of time and space was no longer as vibrant. Even Flora and the others, or rather the dragons, could clearly feel that this once perfect kingdom was now beginning to decline. It was like the dusk of the gods. Although Brendel could already touch upon the true meaning of the power of existence, and the extreme planes that he created using the power of time and space could be said to be flawless, in fact, this level of kingdom was already beyond what he had seen in his previous life. At least, he had never seen any player or NPC that could depict such a pure law. Although the level of his power was still not high, and it was not even comparable to his own power level during the Silver Body era, his strength was incomparable. At the very least, Brando knew very well that if he were to fight his former self in his current state, he would most likely win. In other words, a Sage Domain player could defeat a Silver Body player just by relying on the law. If such news was spread in the past, it would definitely cause a commotion among the players. It meant that most players had taken an irreversible detour on this path. If that was the case, who knew how many people would have to delete their accounts and start all over again? However, no matter how pure and perfect the power was, there would always be a beginning and an end. After all, he was not a god and could only be regarded as a mortal. Perhaps he was one of the best among mortals, but he was still far from being omniscient and omnipotent. Therefore, when his power of law began to dry up, his kingdom inevitably began to waver. In fact, even if he had lasted until now, it was already enough to surprise him. This was actually a lot longer than he had expected. For a moment, Brando even suspected that Fu Luo and the others on the opposite side were not giving their all. However, the two giant dragon corpses floating not far away explained everything. No one would joke about their own life, even if their souls were enslaved by the Twilight Dragon. Soon he understood where the problem was. Brando actually faintly felt that this world was containing his power. To be precise, he felt that this world was continuously transforming and transmitting dark magic to his body. When he raised his power to the peak, this transmission would become particularly obvious because the magic torrent in the void would suddenly increase. This feeling reminded him of the scene he saw at the elemental barrier. Without a doubt, this was the effect of Martha's law of Tiamat, but it was slightly different from that time. The law of Tiamat in Brando's memory was more gentle. It tended to change magic instead of enslaving magic. But here, Brando felt that the coercion was very obvious. It was an absolute order, majestic, solemn, and made people look up to it. Brando's breath was slightly uneven. At the same time, he looked regretfully at the two giant dragon corpses floating in the void not far away. It was a silver dragon and a black dragon. The corpses were full of holes. Brando knew very well that these dragons in front of him did not want to be enemies with him. If possible, he would try not to kill them. But obviously, there were not many choices left for him on the battlefield. He could not dominate this battlefield. The 9 giant dragons working together made him tired. If he held back a little, the corpses left here would not necessarily belong to anyone. But even so, he chose to avoid Flora as much as possible, or at least not cause fatal damage to her. Brando knew very well what Flora meant to Alaz. However, this was quickly noticed by the other side. Even among the dragons, Flora was considered a genius of the new generation. It was definitely not a coincidence that she could be the companion of a new generation of gold dragons like Alaz. But when this wisdom was displayed on his opponent, it gave Brando a headache. She had actively chosen to fight with her life on the line several times. He could see that even in the enslaved state, this dragon girl really did not want to die. It was purely because she saw through his weakness. But he could not ignore this weakness. For this reason, the dragon's line of defense was quickly stabilized. On the other hand, Brando himself became clumsy. The battle had reached the final juncture in a short period of time. Brando felt that his kingdom was on the verge of collapse, and the dragons on Flora's side were naturally aware of this. But except for a few people, there was still more anxiety than joy on their faces. This was not only because they had been delayed here for too long. In fact, at this time, Flora did not care much about winning or losing outside. What she was really worried about was her ally, at least in name, the demon known as the Lord of Inferno. Akinta had deceived them verbally from the beginning. Otherwise, they would not have fallen into such a bitter battle. And the demons obviously would not make meaningless deceptions. Even though they had always been chaotic and evil, They would not deliberately send their allies to the front line to die. The other side must be up to something. Flora had long smelled a strong conspiracy, but what made her anxious was that she still did not know which side this conspiracy was directed at. At this point in the battle, the outcome of this battle was actually not important to both sides. The dragon girl was the first to stop. She took a breath and looked at Brando with a somewhat strange gaze. Although she did not know why this ridiculously powerful young human would tolerate her, it was obvious that the other party did not seem to want to kill them as much as she thought. Maybe we can negotiate, she thought. She thought to herself, then said in a cold tone, "Human, stop." Brando naturally hoped for a chance to catch his breath. In fact, at this time he also saw that the dragon's fighting spirit was fading. This made him click his tongue in wonder. The Twilight Dragon, or rather Roman's method of enslaving these dragons, was very strange. They could still maintain a large degree of independence of thought, except for the fact that their loyalty to the Twilight Dragon would not waver. So when Flora retreated, he stopped and said, "What's the matter?" "Human, although we each have our own master," Flora replied. "This battle is clearly a stalemate. I think your subordinates outside have already cleaned up the nether beasts, but you should be able to see that it's not possible for you to keep us here. If we do our best, I'm afraid it is possible to keep one or two of you." Brando did not want to show weakness. "Indeed, but all you can get is the corpse," the girl said coldly, as if she was explaining something that had nothing to do with her. "I can see that, although I don't know why you don't want to kill him. Since that's the case, I suggest that we both take a step back." "What good will it do for me to let you go?" Brando tried to stall for time, but the other party shamelessly used his weakness, which was a little sharp. He could not help but look at the dragon girl strangely. He did not seem to realize that she had such potential before. "You don't need me to tell you that Akintu is scheming against you in the dark. Although we are barely on the same side as that disgusting devil, it does not mean that we are willing to be its pawns. And now, I am extremely doubtful of its loyalty to its master. I believe that you will be happy to see internal strife between us. In that case, Miss Flora, why don't you?" Brando was interrupted by Flora coldly. "Human, I know what you are thinking, but I suggest that you don't have such thoughts. I have already stated my conditions. We do not like to bargain. You just need to make your stand clear." She paused. "Either we fight or we cooperate. We don't mind." Brando shut his mouth, but he was cursing in his heart. Don't the dragons love to bargain? Why did they lose their favorite hobby after joining the Twilight Dragon? But even so, he still nodded silently. He had to admit that although Flora's suggestion seemed a little ridiculous, every point hit the nail on the head, and he had to consider it. And after careful consideration, he was surprised to find that there were not many choices he could make. In fact, he was indeed very worried about the devil that had been hiding in the dark. The cunning sheep-headed devil was not a title for nothing. Chapter 1403. The moment they retreated to the extreme plain, Brando frowned. He originally thought that he would see a messy battlefield. Or at the very least Phoenix Fire Magadal and the others had not yet defeated the Void Predators, but at least they should have the upper hand. However, the first thing he saw was an endless thin layer of fog. This fog pervaded the wilderness and hills far and near, and seemed somewhat out of place in this pitch-black world with crisscrossing lines of law. It was just that it was different from the chaotic fog they had seen in the Sea of Magic. The latter was majestic as if it was the power of a world, but the fog here was strange and quiet, as if there were unknown creatures lurking inside. This fog shrouded the front, as thin as a shroud floating on the water. When Brando looked into it, he immediately felt a slight dizziness, and the system also issued a timely warning. His willpower was far beyond that of ordinary people, but he was still affected by this fog. This showed how powerful this fog was. Brando immediately recognized that this was the mind fog, a very rare ability of demons. This gave him a bad premonition. The mind fog was actually a variant of dark magic, and most high-grade demons had such power. But they rarely did so. First, because it was unnecessary, and second, because to create such a large-scale fog, they needed to use the means of live sacrifice. Could it be that Akintu had brought the sheephead believers here too? He subconsciously looked up at Farofa and the others, but found that these dragons also had a cautious look on their faces. And at this time Allah's voice came from behind. Brando, how are things over there? As soon as the little female dragon came out of the fog, she hurriedly said, Brando, not good, Fangchi is gone. But when she saw Farofa and the others not far away, her expression changed, and for a moment, she looked at her former companion with a complicated expression. Farofa also looked at her quietly, motionless, but there was no extra expression on her face. Fangchi is missing? Brando was shocked. If Fangchi disappeared, there were only two possibilities. Either he escaped during the chaos or he was taken away. The former conjecture was not impossible. Fangchi had always been different from them. Although he was a man of his words in front of the mystery of the jade, as the successor of the ghost chariot, it was inevitable that he would have ulterior motives. Although Brando never liked to be suspicious, he still asked cautiously, Where's Miss Delphian? That woman. She's still here. The female dragon looked at Fu Luofa and said, What about the ship? I sent Mr. Lu and Huang Hua over, but there is still no news. What happened? When we were fighting, a fog suddenly appeared. Many lesser demons appeared in the fog. Everyone hurriedly gathered and found that Fangchi had already disappeared. Brando frowned. In fact, he had already made up his mind. He raised his head and looked at Fu Luofa. The seemingly unfamiliar black-haired girl also shifted her gaze from Alaz and looked at him. Brando knew that the ship was stranded on the beach, and Fangchi did not have the ability to get it back to the sea. He only asked for insurance purposes, and if Fangchi left because of the Jade Heart, he would most likely take Delphian away. This should not take much effort for him at that time. But he did not do so, so the remaining possibilities were self-evident. And there were only two groups of people who could take Fangchi away. One of them was Fu Luofa and her people, and the other force was Akentu and his minions. Of course, the latter was more likely, but Brando still could not rule out the former. Besides, who knew if this was a trick by the other side? Although Brando did not think it was necessary, Fu Luofa's calm eyes were very persuasive. Although she did not speak, Brando still subconsciously cleared the suspicion of these few dragons. Don't you have anything to say? He asked. If you don't believe us, there's no point in saying anything. If you believe us, there's no need for us to say anything, Fu Luofa replied simply. She paused and thought for a moment before asking, I have a question. Who is Fangchi? He's our companion, Brando replied. At the same time, he observed Fu Luofa's expression as if he wanted to see if she was lying. But to his disappointment, the girl only had one expression from beginning to end. I'm not interested in that. What I mean is, why did Akentu take him away? Are you so sure that it was Akentu who took him away? Brando frowned and said, How can I be sure that this is not deliberately misleading? I don't care what others think. This is just my judgment and I don't need others to believe it, Fu Luofa replied. Because now I'm the one asking a question, not answering your question. Brando was silently stunned for a moment and could not help but look back at Alaz. He thought to himself, so Fu Luofa's usual personality was like this. It was hard to imagine that the little female dragon was willing to be with someone with such a personality. Alaz just stared blankly at her former companion, as if she had lost her soul. At this time, Brando saw one of the dragons behind Fu Luofa whispering something in her ear. The girl's face showed a rare look of shock and anger. Fangchi is the 9 Phoenix with you? What? Forgive me for not accompanying you. Fu Luofa and the other dragons seemed to have encountered something urgent, and they all turned around and left. Brando was stunned for a moment. He wanted to make them stay, but after thinking about it, he gave up the idea. The little female dragon opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she could not make a sound. She could only watch the other party's back disappear into the fog. After a long while, she turned her head and said, Brando, Fu and them? It seems that they are not completely on the same side as Akentu. That demon has other intentions and included them in his calculations. Brando also looked in that direction and replied, Then we? Go and gather everyone. Things may become a little troublesome. Brendel furrowed his brows. He did not leave Fu Luofa behind because he had already guessed the possibility behind. In that case, there was no need to waste time on these dragons controlled by the Twilight Dragon. If they left earlier, they might be able to cause some trouble for Akentu. Brando had already guessed that Akenta's purpose was the stagnation realm. In fact, they had inferred this before going here. It was just that he did not expect that the Lord of Purgatory was so impatient that he personally took action before the seal was lifted. He had overestimated the importance of the Twilight Dragon to the stagnation realm, but he did not expect that he still underestimated it. The secret was so urgent that a high-grade demon lord would not hesitate to take a great risk to take action. It should be known that if all three of Akenta's clones unfortunately fell outside, the seal that maintained it would probably be extended for thousands of years. Everyone quickly gathered together. Even Huang Hua and Mr. Liu, who were sent by Allahs to check the stranded sailboat, were called back. Brando explained his inference, and everyone felt the seriousness of the situation. However, the others did not think too much about it. They just subconsciously thought that they could not let the Twilight Dragon get the orb of nature first. At that moment, no one said anything. The Prime Minister's daughter also began to re-infer the calculation process that was interrupted by the previous battle. It took less than a quarter of an hour to find the way to the stagnation realm again. They did not encounter any trouble along the way. Although it was obvious that Akenta had left many of his minions along the way, Fu Luofa and the others seemed to have passed through here first. Most of Akenta's minions were turned into broken corpses by the angry dragons. The remaining few that escaped the net did not cause any trouble for Brando and the others. However, Brando felt a little puzzled along the way. Obviously, Fu Luofa and Akenta were very clear about the location of the stagnation realm. Along the way, whether it was Akenta's arrangement or the traces left by Fu Luofa and the others, they had never deviated from the scope of Delphian's calculation. This was not to say that Brando thought that only the Prime Minister's daughter in the world could crack the strange formula and calculate the location of the mystery of the emerald. What made him curious was that the sheephead cult knew this place like the back of their hand. From the layout of the cult in the sacred land of Atuk, they had obviously figured out the secrets inside and outside the moon's channel. Otherwise, Fu Luofa and the others would not be able to come in and out of this place so easily. But in this case, why did the sheephead cult never send people to the Nine Phoenix to find the descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot in the past few decades? Otherwise, they would have opened the stagnation realm long ago. How could he bring Huang Hua and Fang Qi to this place? Even if the descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot were more noble than the average person, they were often heavily guarded. But not every descendant of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot were Huang Hua and Fang Qi. In fact, the existence of Huang Hua and Fang Qi in a huge family was in the minority. They could even be regarded as the core existence. But in the periphery, there were many descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot bloodline. Just like in Erewhon, core members of the royal family like Haruz, Griffin, the eldest prince, and Kiara were also considered the descendants of the royal bloodline. But there were also descendants of the royal bloodline like Amandina, Ling, and Lotus who were wandering outside, not to mention some branches of the family. Not everyone had a high status. Oh. Chapter 1404. For cultists like the sheephead cult, it would not take much effort to kidnap such a person, and it would not attract too much attention. However, the sheephead cult and their master, Akentu, the Lord of Purgatory, did not choose to do so, which inevitably made Brando feel suspicious. Brando did not speak, and most of the others seemed a little dull. Everyone seemed to have a lot on their minds, not only because they were worried that the demons would beat them to it, but also because they were worried about the safety of their companions. Although Fang Qi had always behaved differently from them, after getting along with each other for so many days, and even going through life and death together, even Huang Hua more or less recognized this genius of the Phantom Chariot lineage, but they did not say it out loud. However, Brando did not know that his doubts might seem ridiculous to Akentu. It was just a simple question. In fact, although the sheephead cult had long calculated the secret of the channels of the moons, they had only just opened the door to the 10th channel, and their time was not much faster than Brando's. The reason was simply that they had not been able to find a suitable dragon willing to work with them before this. Fortunately, the awakening of the Twilight Dragon finally solved Akenta's problem. After opening the 10th channel, they understood that one of the conditions for solving the mystery of the emerald and going to the stagnation realm was to need the inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline. At this time, the southern part of Madara was in chaos, and the route through the Sea of the Dead Moons to the Nine Phoenix had long been cut off. First, it was blocked by the army of the Crystal Cluster. At that time, the sheephead cult could still barely go to the Tao Strait. After all, although the crystal cluster did not acknowledge the demons, they were at least part of the army of chaos. However, after the Battle of Fenhotos, this road was occupied by the Lost Names. This time, the sheephead cult completely lost the possibility of going south, so it was basically impossible to bring back an inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline. Akinta had heard that there was a bloodline inheritor from the Jade Phoenix clan in Erewhon. He had been thinking of investigating this matter, but he did not expect that things would take a turn for the better. When Tao Chica met Brando and the others, he had actually suspected the identities of Feng Qi and Huang Hua. Demons were born in the abyss, and their dark magic power mixed with the negative emotions in the hearts of mortals: pain, despair, greed, and pride. Therefore, they were most sensitive to the inheritance of human hearts and blood. However, before it could put its suspicions into practice, its doppelganger had been sliced into two by Brando's heaven-shaking sword. Even now, it still had lingering fears when it recalled that sea-parting sword. Don't be fooled by its tough words. In fact, even if it wasn't sealed at its peak, it might not be able to easily withstand such a sword. Under such circumstances, how would it dare to find trouble with Brando? But what happened next made Akinta feel that the power of chaos was omnipresent. Brando and the others were heading towards the Green Sea, and were discovered by its own subordinates. At that time, its mind began to spin those plots and tricks that it was accustomed to. Of course, all tricks needed to be matched with sufficient strength. Otherwise, it would only become a laughable joke. If it was any other time, it would definitely not dare to play any tricks in front of that terrifying young man. But it just so happened that there was another group of people sent by its supreme master. To be precise, it was Flora and her dragon companions. Akinta didn't like these self-righteous dragons, even though they had defected to the supreme master. But that didn't mean that he couldn't make use of them. In fact, it was precisely because of the existence of these dragons that his plan could be realized. As for the result of the plan, Akinta looked down at the young man in front of it. There was no doubt that it was Feng Qi. But at this time, this genius of the chariot lineage was in a strange state. He stood motionless in front of the Lord of Purgatory with a blank look in his eyes like a puppet. Akinta couldn't help but feel satisfied seeing him like this. In fact, it had already planted a seed of fear in Feng Qi's heart. That day in Tao Chica's temple, if it wasn't for Brando interrupting, it would have made this young man submit. Although it didn't do its best at that time, this seed wasn't completely useless. At least when it used those pitiful servants to carry out the living sacrifice ritual to create the mind fog, it didn't take much effort to make Feng Qi completely lose his consciousness. Otherwise, if the other party had reacted and the Titan had discovered its existence, even the dignified Purgatory Lord would not have been able to bear the consequences. But this is the power of a conspiracy. Akinta proudly praised itself. It was full of disdain towards Fuluafa and Brando's group. So what if it's the Sage Domain? So what if it's a dragon? Aren't you just being played around by this lord's avatar? Ha, a bunch of fools. It looked at the puppet-like Feng Qi with satisfaction before slowly walking forward. This place was a basin in the depths of the hills. If Brando was here, he would definitely find the terrain very familiar. This was because the terrain was very similar to the Silver Elf's tomb in the depths of Chablis. It was where he first met the Silver Elf Princess Medisha. There was also the commander of the Phoenix Guards called Nalathar. He remembered that he had promised Nalathar that once he was free, he would go back and tell him what had happened in the outside world in the past 1,000 years. But ever since he settled down in Abes, he had been unable to do as he wished. In the past 3 years he did not have any extra time. In this basin, the place where the Silver Elf's holy church was supposed to be was now a flat, empty land. Crisscrossing lines of law marked the location of this place among the crisscrossing hills. In the middle of the basin, a crystal ball floated in midair. The crystal ball was very similar to the floating sphere that Tata gave to Brendel, but it was obviously much bigger. This made it look more like a teleportation portal that was suspended in midair. It was a spherical teleportation portal. Inside the crystal ball was a vast and unfamiliar land. But it was different from the Wone that was seen from outside the elemental boundary. Wone was a continent that was full of vitality. The atmosphere emitted a fluorescent blue light that covered the vast ocean and land. The continent was covered with dark forests, mountains and rivers intertwined. The surface runoff washed out the plains at the estuary. Civilizations gathered here and formed cities and settlements. Sailboats could be seen on the ocean. However, the world inside the crystal ball was a lifeless world. It was like a piece of metal covered in dark red rust. Its surface was bumpy and covered in ugly scars. Although there were mountains and valleys on it, the valleys had long dried up. Even the place where the ocean used to be was only left with a huge, shocking depression. On the entire continent, there was not a single trace of life. Not to mention green forests, there was not even a single grassland or tundra. It was as if there was only brown and red soil. Storms swept across the continent at thousands of miles per hour, sweeping away everything that could possibly exist. When Akintu approached the crystal ball unsurprisingly released an invisible force. This force seemed gentle, but it made the Lord of Purgatory suffer considerable pain. Akintu's face showed that he could not bear it. He could not help but curse viciously. But when he took another step forward, the whole valley where the crystal ball was located suddenly shone brightly. A huge magic circle appeared on the ground. In the light, Akintu screamed, and half of his body almost disappeared. He hurriedly retreated with a look of lingering fear on his face. Compared to before he entered the valley, his body seemed a little illusory. This was because his body was originally just a projection. In fact, it was part of his power. But this power had obviously been damaged in the previous conflict. The terrible power of the crystal ball stopped Akintu in his tracks. At the same time he frowned. Now that he had the inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline, he had fulfilled the requirement to open the stagnation realm. But the problem was, how should he use it? If it could, in fact it did not care whether Fangqi lived or died. So what if a demon sacrificed a human to achieve its goal? In its eyes, the royal family of the Nine Phoenixes were no different from ordinary people. They were just ordinary people like insects, but he only had one bargaining chip. If he accidentally killed him before he could open the gate, he would have to go back and find trouble with Brando, because there was still one inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline left. Of course, this was what Akintu did not want to see. With his current power, he did not even want to face Fu Luofa and the others, let alone Brando. He looked back at Fangqi. Previously, he had tried to bleed and sacrifice his soul. Of course, it was not complete. He also tried to harm himself, but he did not succeed. Did he really have to kill this person? Akintu was a little hesitant because he only had one chance. If he failed, the result would be unbearable. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "You come here." Chapter 1405. Seeing this damn demon speak, Fangqi couldn't help but feel a sense of vigilance in his heart. But he didn't dare to be negligent. He could only pretend to be numb and walk over. Yes, in fact, Fangqi wasn't enslaved by this demon at all from the beginning. Back then, Akintu had implanted a trace of fear deep in his heart. But the swordsmanship of the Nine Phoenix lineage was very different from Won's power. If one had to say, it would be that the swordsmen of the Nine Phoenix lineage paid more attention to the cultivation of the mind. Although the Phantom Chariot was a traitor of the Nine Phoenix lineage, it didn't mean that they had fallen spiritually. In fact, it was the opposite. The Ironheart and White Raven swordsmanship were more focused on the cultivation of the mind than the Desert Wind swordsmanship. Especially the former, it required the user to be as calm as water. And Fangqi, as the leader of this lineage, of course, surpassed his master. He was oppressed by Akintu back then because of the huge difference in strength. And when Akintu's clone died, he immediately noticed the flaw in his mind. The people of the Nine Phoenix were also a member of this world. Naturally, he knew how terrifying the demons were. He didn't dare to hide the matter that day and told Brando and Delphian about it. Brando knew the tricks of the demons like the back of his hand. Although he couldn't do anything about the demon's seed of courage, it was the masterpiece of a demon lord after all. And the domain of the mind had always been mysterious. Other than the mysterious psionic users in the north of Nazir, few people were proficient in mind magic, whether it was Wond or the Nine Phoenix. But Brando's solution was very simple and effective. He immediately let the little female dragon use magic to shield the seed of courage in Fangqi's heart. After all, the seed of courage wasn't invincible. In fact, if it wasn't constantly protected by its master, it would soon disappear. But the demons would often appear in front of the victim shortly after planting the seed of fear. They would seize the power of the spell and completely make the victim submit and become enslaved. Generally, the demons would only plant the seed of courage on the more important servants. Brando didn't understand why Akenta would plant such a thing on Feng Qi. He could only think that it was Akenta's bad taste. But at that time, Akenta's doppelganger had already been killed by him, and presumably, he wouldn't appear in front of Feng Qi for a while. Adding to that, Feng Qi didn't take this matter to heart. But what Brendel and Feng Qi didn't expect was that their unintentional action would actually play a role at this time. When Akenta appeared in front of Feng Qi again, the latter could not help but rejoice in his heart, knowing that he had finally escaped a disaster. However, he had only managed to escape the fate of being enslaved. Akenta didn't realize that his seed of courage didn't work, but the difference in strength between the two was like heaven and earth. Feng Qi was smart enough to know that he couldn't resist. Otherwise, regardless of whether Magadol could react in time, his head would definitely fall to the ground first. He immediately pretended to be obsessed and obediently left with the Lord of Purgatory. He only hoped that Brando and the others could react quickly and come to save him. It was only at this moment that he wanted to see that damned Aween person, and his own cousin more than ever. I hope Miss Delphian can analyze my situation quickly. Otherwise, I'll be in big trouble this time. Feng Qi's expression didn't change. He walked to Akenta's side like a puppet, but his mind was spinning with thoughts. Because the little female dragon's magic hadn't lost its effect, the Lord of Purgatory beside him didn't realize his true thoughts. Go to the crystal ball. Akenta coldly glanced at his servant, and ordered at the same time. Feng Qi was stunned. He couldn't help but feel ecstatic. Of course he knew what the crystal ball was. Didn't they come all the way here for the mystery of Emerald? And the answer to the mystery of Emerald was undoubtedly the door to the stagnation realm. Although he didn't know what the stagnation realm looked like, he could roughly guess what it was after seeing the scene in the crystal ball. Of course, he wasn't someone who would risk his life for a little benefit. He knew that under the surveillance of this demon, he wouldn't be able to play any tricks. But the scene he saw earlier gave him great hope. Obviously, that damn demon was extremely afraid of the crystal ball, and there was an invisible magic circle around the crystal ball that could stop it from moving forward. And this guy obviously wanted him to get close to the crystal ball? Feng Qi wasn't a fool. Brando had already told him that he and Huang Hua were allowed to join this adventure team because the method to unlock the mystery of Emerald might use his and Huang Hua's bloodline inheritance. How could he not understand that this damn demon should have the same idea now? This also meant that the risk of him getting close to the crystal ball was obviously much lower than that of this damn demon. His heart couldn't help but pound for a moment. If he could leave this damn demon and run into the crystal ball alone, wouldn't this demon be unable to do anything to him? More importantly, the crystal ball was related to the secret of the ultimate inheritance of the 9 Phoenix. Yes, he did promise Brendel and the others that he would share the secrets inside, but that was under the original plan. Now that he was controlled by this devil, he had no choice but to do so. If he could profit from this disaster and obtain the treasures in the stagnation realm first, then he couldn't be blamed for it. Although the descendants of the Ghost Chariot lineage valued trust, they weren't pedantic people who followed the rules. Otherwise, they wouldn't have betrayed the 9 Phoenix lineage. Feng Qi thought of this possibility and almost couldn't maintain his emotions on the surface. Even Akenta noticed his abnormality and couldn't help but look back at him doubtfully. This glance almost scared Feng Qi out of his wits. Fortunately, he managed to control the fear and greed in his heart at the last moment. At the same time, the demon seemed to be quite confident in its strength and didn't believe that it couldn't even suppress a mere mortal with the enlightenment of truth, so it didn't doubt it too much. Akenta's glance wasn't so much suspicion as it was urging Feng Qi's dissatisfaction with his hesitation. It didn't know that its servant wasn't afraid, but was absent-minded because he was too excited. Feng Qi took a deep breath and then pretended to be stiff as he walked into the stagnation realm. Although he was quite convinced by Brando and Delphian's inference, he couldn't help but feel nervous at this moment. Who knew if this strange magic circle and crystal ball really needed the blood of the 9 Phoenix to open? What if it attacked him like it attacked the demon? Thinking about it, the cold-blooded demon lord wouldn't take pity on a mere mortal's life and let him stop midway. Maybe it had the intention of sacrificing him alive. Feng Qi didn't expect that his casual guess had almost guessed Akinta's thoughts, but at least he still kept a straight face and slowly approached the crystal ball. 50 feet, 40 feet, in fact, he had already passed the area where Akinta was first repelled by the crystal ball, but the crystal ball was still and didn't seem to show any signs of exerting the terrifying power from before. At this moment, Feng Qi couldn't help but feel excited, but he still understood that he was not completely out of danger. At least at this distance, the damn demon lord still dared to go deep. If he dared to run away, the other party would definitely drag him back like a dead duck before he could react. At that time, his life and death would no longer be in his control. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but tremble. But he still walked forward step by step calmly until he entered the position where Akinta had triggered the magic circle. And in the valley, it was still quiet at this moment. Seeing this scene, Akinta couldn't help but widen his eyes, and even his breathing became a little heavy. Feng Qi's breathing also became heavy, and the veins on his arms and forehead bulged. Of course, he knew that the opportunity was right in front of him, but the more it was at this moment, the more he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Unfortunately, some things were beyond human control, and one of them was the speed of his heartbeat and blood flow. Before this, although his emotions occasionally fluctuated, they were still within his control. Coupled with the little female dragon's spell shielding him, Akinta was careless and did not notice it for a while. But at this moment, if Akinta still couldn't discover the abnormal movements of his strange servant, then he would be claiming the title of Demon Lord in vain, not to mention that his nickname was Cunning. In fact, the moment Feng Qi's breathing became heavy, Akinta roared, "Damn it, stop right there." This roar exploded like thunder, scaring Feng Qi so much that he almost jumped up. But how could this genius ghost chariot stop at this time? Besides, he was not a fool, so he immediately reacted and ran. As soon as he moved, Akinta understood that he had been fooled. This was simply a great shame. He, a demon lord, was actually deceived by a mere mortal. Not to mention, he had even boasted in front of this human and mocked Brando and Fu Luofa, showing off his superiority. Thinking that his previous performance had fallen into the eyes of Feng Qi, Akinta wished that there was a hole in the ground for him to crawl into. But before that, he understood that it was more important to capture this damn human and kill him to silence him. "You're dead!" Akinta screamed and flew in Feng Qi's direction. At this time, Feng Qi had actually given up all thoughts. There was only one thought in his mind: to run as fast as he could. As long as he got close to the crystal ball, he would be safe. But he never dreamed that he had overestimated the strength of this demon lord's clone. But he still did not expect the other party to be so much faster than him. Just as he took his second step, he felt a sharp whistling sound coming from behind him from within the bright light of the formation. Even if he did not look back, he knew that it was Akinta's claw. "It's over." Feng Qi's heart was filled with despair. Chapter 1406. But the expected attack did not come. Feng Qi heard Akinta roar angrily behind him. The dazzling light of the magic circle in the valley was quickly dimming. A black shadow flashed in front of him, and then he saw a black-haired girl appear beside him. Feng Qi vaguely remembered that this girl was the one who blocked their way before. Knowing that she was an enemy and not a friend, he subconsciously wanted to move aside. But Fu Luofa would not let him do as he wished. She just glanced at him indifferently, and the invisible power of law surged from all directions and wrapped around Feng Qi like a spider web. Feng Qi only felt his body stiffen, and then his hands and feet did not listen to him. He stood straight on the spot, the peak of the supreme realm. He immediately understood the gap between him and the other party, and he could not help but feel despair. Brendel was even younger than him, but his strength was far above him. The girl in front of him didn't look too old either. In fact, based on the age of a dragon, his guess wasn't wrong. Her strength was also more than one level higher than him. Poor Feng Qi did not know that he had either encountered a cheater, a demon lord, or a new generation of dragons. For a moment he doubted his outlook on life and regretted getting involved in this mess. Fu Luofa. Akinta once again retreated outside the magic circle. This demon's avatar was already covered with burned scars, and its body was beginning to fade. Obviously, the magic circle had done a lot of damage to it. It roared angrily, "How dare you sneak attack me? Damn it, do you know what you are doing?" Luofa did not even look at it. As soon as she landed, the 6 dragons landed behind her. They were only slightly slower than her. They were obviously not rejected by the magic circle like the Lord of Purgatory. Luofa looked back at the crystal ball calmly and said coldly, "How disappointing, Akentu. You even dare to be selfish in Master's plan. You have really fallen after mixing with these mortals for thousands of years. You are the one who ruined Master's plan, you damn female lizard. Do you know how important this plan is to Master?" Akinta angrily shouted. "Give that human back to me, we want him to open the gate to the stagnation realm." "Yes, it's we," Flora replied. She looked at her companion. "You've done too many unnecessary things, Akentu, so I declare that you're excluded from this plan. I have to be responsible for the Master. Do you want to face the Master's anger?" Akinta couldn't help but shudder when he heard this. But there is no conflict between the two. The Demon Lord's voice finally weakened, although it was secretly gnashing its teeth in hatred, thinking that the damned flying lizards had come at the wrong time. "Only when I lift the seal can I serve Master better. The two are the same thing and it does not need to waste too much time. Look, I'm already here. Once the seal weakens, I'll be able to enter the stagnation realm." "This is why Master is disappointed in you, Akentu," Flora replied coldly. "Your thoughts are mixed with too many mortal things, utilitarian, greedy and self-righteous. You will never understand that no matter what you think, it's not important. What's important is Master's will. If Master didn't let you do it, you can't do it." "No, I've never betrayed Master," Akinta shouted in panic. "I've been to the stagnation realm before. I know that place better than you. You can't exclude me." "Shut up, Akintu." All of a sudden a voice boomed. It was as if the entire valley was shaking. This voice came from Flora's mouth, but it was deeper and hoarser. If Brando was here, he would be surprised to find that this voice was like a copy of the merchant lady's, but it was obviously more mature and dignified. This voice made the Lord of Purgatory, Akinta's expression contort. He almost knelt down in fear. "My Supreme Master, your humble servant has absolutely no intention of betraying you. You can't just listen to that damned female lizard side of the story. She is jealous of me, of your most loyal servant." "Humph." The Twilight Dragon's voice seemed very distant and deep. Its will was blocked outside the world crystal wall, and it seemed to lack control over this place. However, it still showed its dissatisfaction. "You've disappointed me, Akintu. Now go do your thing. I don't care what your grudge with Flora is. As long as I see that thing, you'll understand what I want." "I'm sure I understand your intentions, my lord. I'm afraid there's no one better than me in this world who can understand your meaning better. My lord, I'll definitely do what you've entrusted." Akintu, this great demon, crawled on the ground and answered while trembling. It was hard to believe that this was actually a high-ranked demon lord, a king of purgatory. The pressure that shrouded the valley finally dissipated, but for a moment, no one dared to make any unnecessary sounds. Feng Qi, who was bound by Flora, witnessed this scene with his own eyes. His heart couldn't help but sink. He originally hoped that Brando and his cousin could come to rescue him. But facing this enemy in human legends, the former destroyer of the world, and the ultimate evil described in the Pale Epic, the Twilight Dragon, Feng Qi found that he really didn't feel any hope. After a long while, Akinta's clone got up from the ground while trembling. He cursed the damned dragon in his heart, but at this moment, he didn't dare to show any disrespectful look on his face. At this time, Flora represented the will of the Supreme Master. Although he was a demon lord, the entire demon army was just a branch of the Twilight Force. Not to mention that below the river of scorching heat, he wasn't the first giant. "Miss Flora," he hesitated for a moment before saying carefully, "I've understood the Master's meaning. Now what do you want me to do?" Flora glanced at the tall demon and didn't even frown, as if the dispute between the two didn't exist. She replied flatly, "Now, send us into the stagnation realm immediately." "This?" Akinta looked hesitant when he heard this. The Flora formation clearly showed that it was excluded, which of course made him feel extremely dissatisfied. It had been trapped here for many years, and now was its only hope to get out. Otherwise, it would have to count on its incompetent sheepshead followers, who knew how many years it would take to completely pry open the seal placed by those damned Bugas. Moreover, the words of the Twilight Dragon before allowed him to survive. Obviously, the Supreme Master was not interested in the filth between him and these dragons. He only needed the results, which meant that he was not completely unimaginable. As long as he achieved his goal in the end, the Master didn't mind who completed it. Of course, he couldn't waste too much time. Thinking of this, the Great Demon couldn't help but hesitate. Miss Flora, I think the Master wants us to work together. After all, I'm a little older than you and have seen more things than you. Kentu, have you ever thought about why the Master is so angry with you? You're wasting too much time talking about these things here in a roundabout way. Perhaps you've been in the human world for too long, so you've been infected with their bad habits? Flora replied. Well, I don't have time to be long-winded with you here. The inheritor of the 9 Phoenix bloodline is already here. Presumably, this matter is not troublesome for you. This is your last chance. Damn ******. Akinta gritted his teeth and cursed in his heart, but he didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction on his face. His crimson eyes turned slightly, and he replied respectfully, Well, I understand. In fact, it's very simple to enter the stagnation realm. You're not sealed, so you won't be rejected by this magic circle. As long as you bring him, you can enter the stagnation realm. It's that simple? Flora glanced at the Lord of Purgatory suspiciously. In her opinion, this Lord of Purgatory wouldn't compromise so easily. This is the main battlefield of the Fourth War. These humans are the mortal descendants of the Zanas. The Zanas sealed the old world here just to prevent us from entering. Akinta looked at the dragon girl angrily. It has no defense against you despicable species of order, especially with the inheritor of the Zanas bloodline as the key to open this door. It's not an exaggeration to say that this door is a smooth path for you. Ferofa frowned slightly. She knew that Akinta was right, but Akinta's respectful behavior aroused her suspicion. This infernal king had never been described as respectful or honest in any of the legends left behind in history. Miss Flora, if you have any doubts about this, I'm willing to lead the way for you. Akinta saw Flora's hesitation and smiled, revealing his white sharp teeth. But you have to help me suppress the power of this magic circle. Otherwise, I won't dare to come in my current state. As he spoke, he deliberately showed his clone's weak appearance. Although he did look battered and exhausted now, after being attacked by the magic circle several times, this clone had difficulty even maintaining its basic form.